The PhD in History and Political Science from Makerere University. He served as the chair of the Center for African Studies at Uganda Matters University. Currently, he contributes to Kampala Archdiocesan magazine Catholic News Report. And at the same time, his research interests include political violence, forced migration, and social justice, with particular emphasis on Africa's Great Lakes region. We have panelists. We have Dr. John Bosco Kamoga. Please, just if you can show your hand. We have Dr. Jim Espire Sentongo, he's online. We have Dr. Bernadette Ruerekela. Have you shown your hand, please? We have Dr. Deo Katono. We have Dr. Christine Mbabazi-Mpyangu. And we have someone who will be coming in, she's teaching, called Dr. Charlotte Mafumbo. She will be joining us. So we are going to do this as follows. We are going to call Lwassampijja Rasa to come and present. You are allowed 40 minutes. And then we shall have the critical reader who is going to engage you for 60 minutes. And then after that, we shall allow the panelists to engage the candidate. Each is given 5 minutes. And then the public is given 10 minutes. And from there, we shall go back to Dean's office, we deliberate, and we shall come back here and give our verdict. So that's all. Anatoli, you are most welcome. And today is your day. We are just here to engage you. Thank you, so all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alveni Mbabazi. And thank you.
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm called Mbabazi Veni. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Prof. Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'm to present to you my doctoral thesis. And the thesis is titled Religion, Political Clientelism in Uganda, the Catholic Church and State Relations since 1960. And for this presentation, I'll be taking you through these 9 segments. But allow me to start with what motivated me to carry on this study. Now, my motivation to undertake this study was drawn from the growing tensions between the Ugandan state and religious institutions, particularly the efforts by the government leaders to always silence the clergy whenever they engaged in political discourse. And whereas religion in Uganda has always been like a moral compass and a powerful voice, this voice has in recent years always been challenged, restricted, and at times openly rebuked by the state. The key defining moment for me was in 2017 during the constitutional amendment bill, which was seeking to lift the age limit cap for presidential aspirants. At this moment, several religious leaders rose up to speak in defense of constitutionalism and moral responsibility. And this did not go well with the powers that be. And politicians like President Museveni lashed at these religious leaders and rebuked them, and without mincing words, he characterized them as arrogant traitors who were meddling into the affairs of the country. And to Museveni, such religious leaders had to only focus on developmental issues such as finding ways to eradicate poverty. And this was the kind of language he used even towards the end of 2018, that is on the eve of 2018 in his address. However, religious leaders, particularly Archbishop Cyprian Kizito Lwanga, outrightly and boldly hit back at the president and boldly affirmed the clergy's responsibility to engage in civic discussions and to actually guide the nation, as the church was the moral compass. And I was particularly inspired by the courage of Cyprian Kizito Lwanga, the Archbishop, who stood firm at this moment to talk back to power. And it was at this moment when the prophetic voice of the church and the coercive power of the state were at friction that propelled my academic study. And while several religious leaders, including Anglicans, Muslims, and several other people were dissatisfied with the constitutional amendment, my focus was largely on the Catholic Church and its critique of this constitutional amendment as a point of entry to historicize the Catholic Church and state relations from the eve of independence to the present. And in this study, I sought to illuminate how the Catholic Church shaped, restricted, and engaged with the state in the quest for democracy and democratic governance. And that brings me to my background of the study. In Uganda, we have some sort of a tripartite religious heritage, where we have the traditional African religion, we have external religions such as Christianity and Islam. Islam came first in 1940s and later on Christianity in 1870s. And now the advent of these external religions ushered in Uganda, particularly in Buganda where they first came, a multidimensional relationship between religion and politics. When the CMS, that is the Anglicans and the White Fathers who were Catholics, came to Buganda, they did not only bring new religions into the region, but they also brought with them, or along with them, European rivalries. And these rivalries culminated in what came to be known, even in Buganda, as the religious wars of 1888 to 1892. And essentially, while at first scholars looked at these wars as wars on theological grounds, wars which were waged on grounds of theological differences, other scholars like Henry Medad, looked at them as struggles for political power. And the harrowing occurrences of these wars brought about or contributed in a way also to the British colonization of Uganda. And in 1894, Uganda was declared a British protectorate as a way of trying to safeguard the future and the presence of Christianity in this country. With the British being Anglican, they tended to lean towards the Protestant church, and this entrenched what I term as a Protestant hegemony in Uganda's political landscape. And this sectarian imbalance continued into the 20th century, and it also shaped the path to independence. In the post-colonial era, we see that each regime from Obote, Amin, and Museveni, all these regimes have tried to negotiate relationship with the church, and these successive governments have approached the church and state relations with varying degrees of antagonism, accommodation, and the similarities and differences between their relationship with the church always lied in the trepidations that followed, because Obote was a little bit accommodative at first, but later on when he turned to socialist tendencies, it kind of alienated him with the church. Idi Amin then comes in with repression and favor, and NRM, which has always sought to depoliticize religion and separate church and state. So for this background, I note that for the missionaries' arrival through the missionary rivalries of the 19th century to the sectarian imbalances of the colonial period and the contested terrain of politics, religion has consistently shaped the contours of power in this country. And on several occasions, or at different times, the church has always been seen as a supporter. On other occasions, it is seen as a critic. On other occasions, it is seen as a moral opposer to the state power. But despite all these repeated attempts by the state to limit religious influence in politics, the church has remained a central actor in Uganda's public life. And this background now brings me to my problem statement. And for my research problem, I note that there has always been an ambivalent relationship between the church and the state. And this is because several governments have always drawn on the church for legitimacy, but at the same time they have also viewed the church as a rival on certain occasions, especially in the public life. And the roots of this ambivalence comes from the colonial denominational hierarchies, which I've talked about in my background, and also post-independence sectarian legacies, which have always been maintained through political clientelism. And there has been a lot of scholarship on religion and politics. However, this dominant scholarship has tended to focus on religious political groupings that emerged during the wars of religion, which I've talked about. Other scholars have zeroed on talking about the influence of religion in the formation of political parties as Uganda was being ushered into independence. However, there has been insufficient scholarship on the Catholic Church and state relations. And this is where this study comes in to seek or to engage a discourse on how the Catholic Church and state in post-colonial times have related and have addressed questions of leadership, struggled for visibility in Uganda's public life. The overriding goal of this study was to explore how the Catholic Church has related with the state during key historical moments when the two institutions struggled for visibility. And I'm settling at key historical moments because of just because of specificity and because of the wideness of the time scope. That's why I zero on key historical moments. And the study was guided by 4 specific objectives. That is, to examine the role played by the Catholic Church through the activities of Archbishop Joseph Chiwanuka in the years leading to independence, to analyze the religio-political significance of the 1969 papal visit to Uganda, to assess Idi Amin's maneuvers to limit the visibility of the Catholic Church, and lastly, to examine the attempts by the NRM government to separate religion from politics. For the theoretical framework, my study adopted an integrative theoretical framework because during the course of my study, I realized that there is no single theory that can completely capture the historical complexities of the dynamics of power, legitimacy, and moral authority. And as such, the study adopts 4 theories, or relied on 4 theories. That is, Antonio Gramsci's theory on cultural hegemony, secularization theory, post-secularism, and also Foucault's theory on governmentality. And all these theories help me to understand the 4 historical periods that I'm studying or that I seek to examine. For starters, I used Antonio Gramsci's cultural hegemony to understand church and state relations in the colonial times. Because Gramsci argues that religion can indeed be a political force with a decisive impact on the political structure. And because of this, he argues that the ruling class can sustain dominance, not simply through education, through through economic exploitation, like the Marxists say, or through economic control, or through the media, but he pays attention to the power of religion. And relying on this theory, I could easily understand why there was a privileged status which was accorded to the Protestant church during the colonial era, and the emergence or the entrenchment of Protestant hegemony in the colonial era and in the politics of Uganda at that time. Another theory that I look at is the secularization theory, which comes or which is developed from the Enlightenment age in Europe. And this theory was brought about because of the constant wars of religion and the church domination of state affairs, which was taking place in Europe. For those who remember your history, you know what the church was doing in France in the early 1870s. Sorry. But then scholars who, or the proponents of this theory, or the thinkers, like John Locke and Baruch Spinoza, argue that the state should not have authority over the spiritual realm, and they advocate for a clear distinction between religious institutions and government entities. And this theory helps me understand the legal boundaries which were used to demarcate this church and state sphere during the framing of the 1962 Constitution. However, this theory has one limitation, because it assumes or presupposes that indeed there can be a strict separation of church and state, which cannot be the case for the case of Uganda, which has religion deeply embedded in the political landscape. Another theory that I look at is post-secularism. And proponents of these, like Habermas, Jose Casanova, and Talal Assad, argue that whereas the secularists thought that religion could be dismissed because the influence of religion could decline with the introduction of technology and all of that and development, these scholars, the post-secular thinkers, argue that religion cannot be dismissed. It re-emerges in another form, and it kind of creates another space of in the public. It is actually, how best can I say this? It reenacts itself, and it is actually influential in the modern life, and it's influential in the public life. Now, this theory is quite useful because it explains the church's renewed political voice in the present era. However, its limitations lie in the fact that it does not fully explain the historical continuities and institutional power struggles. And that is why I work with several other theories, the two I've mentioned earlier, and even the final theory, which was Michel Foucault's theory on governmentality. Now, Michel Foucault was interested in how power evolved. And he argues that power is diffuse, and it is not concentrated solely in the hands of the state or a specific person. And this theory reveals how power is negotiated not only through laws. Sorry, let me just take some water. Okay, thank you. Now, this theory reveals how power is negotiated not only through laws, but through moral discourse. The only limitation I got with this theory was the fact that Foucault didn't largely focus on the role of religion in public life, which is my focus. But his historical approach was quite suitable for shedding light on how the dynamics between the church and state have changed and influenced one another. For my research methodology, I relied on, this study is grounded on the social constructivist ontology, which views concepts such as religious legitimacy or moral authority as historically constructed rather than fixed realities. I also used or relied on, epistemologically, I adopted the interpretivist stance because my concern was to understand how actors like the church leaders and the political elites, even the Catholic faithfuls, interpreted their role in the public life and used language to shape political meaning. I adopted a historical research design to conduct this study, and this was most appropriate because it helped me to trace the changes and continuities across different regimes from Obote I to Amin and to the NRM. And this design enabled me to triangulate between different sources, that is the oral, archival, and the textual evidence, thereby ensuring credibility and reliability of my findings. I relied on documents, I did archival research, and I consulted the Uganda National Archives, the Mission of Africa Archives in Rome, Makerere Africana Archives, and the Rubaga Diocesan Archives, from where I got several Catholic publications like Muno, Mosizi, Pastolators, Vatican correspondences, and I also conducted some interviews to reinforce what I had discovered from the archival sources. In terms of study area, this study focused on the Catholic Church, but particularly I focused on the Kampala ecclesiastical provinces. The church has 4 ecclesiastical provinces, but I focused on the central one, which is the Kampala ecclesiastical provinces and its suffragan dioceses, that is Kampala Archdiocese, Chiyinda Mitiana, Kasana Luwero, and Lugazi. Why did I do this? This was because of the location. It is located in the center, it is located in the nation's capital, and as such, I could easily observe the church and state interactions from a front row view. Away from that, the Kampala ecclesiastical provinces has rich archives which are found at Rubaga Archives, and by the choice of this study area was premised on its methodological feasibility and also empirical richness of this site. Time scope, I focused on 4 historical periods, that is from 1960s to 1966, because like I said in my introduction, there was already a Protestant dominance in the colonial era. And coming to independence, right from 1940s, Carol Summers has talked about Catholic action, and she shows how Catholics now began to engage in the began to take front page interest in the political affairs of the country and fight against exclusion which was happening. So I look at 1960s, and this was a transition from absolute monarchism to democratic governance. And that's how I look. And in that very area, away from that transition, Uganda gets independence, and also look at Obote's first tenure as from his premiership up to the 1966. Another historical period is 1966 to 1977, which is Obote I regime, 1971 to 1979, which is Idi Amin's regime, and 1986 to present. That is the NRM era. Now, allow me to delve into my findings. For my findings in Objective 1, the main question I asked in this objective was, what role did the Catholic Church under Archbishop Joseph Kiwanuka play in Uganda's transition to independence? And how did this leadership shape the moral and political vision of the emerging nation? The argument I make in this objective is that Archbishop Joseph Kiwanuka articulated a distinctly Catholic vision for political participation and governance through his fundamental document, that is the 1961 Pastoral Letter. And his vision sought to challenge the Anglican model of governance, influence model of governance inherited from the colonial rule by promoting a civic order rooted in justice, truth, and moral responsibility. For us to appreciate this argument, we need to know the context around this time. This was a time when political parties had been formed in 1950s. We had the UNC, Uganda National Congress, in 1952, the Democratic Party, 1956, and UPC in 1960. And as Uganda was being prepared for independence, arrangements were made to have their representative, to have them represent themselves in the National Assembly. And constituencies were demarcated right from the 1960s in preparation for the 1961 first direct elections to the legical. In these elections, voting was by adult suffrage. And this did not go well with Buganda, and Buganda decided to boycott the election simply because initially it was the Kabaka who nominated Buganda's representatives to the legical. However, other parties continued to mobilize and have people engage in the politics, in the exercise, by registering to vote and also participating in the voting. And as a result, DP won these elections. And now this is where the mix comes up, because the Kabaka had boycotted, and here is DP having Bendicto Chiwanuka, a Muganda, becoming or emerging victor and becoming the chief prime minister, or you can call them chief. He was a chief minister then, right now that is the prime minister of today. And this did not go well. Whoever registered to vote was accused of being a traitor to the Kabaka. And as a result, simply because DP had the majority cadres being Catholics, there was a lot of anti-Catholic violence at this time. So when you read Jonathan Al's work, he has documented clearly the kind of violence which was meted to the Catholics who registered and partook in this voting exercise. Their crops were slashed. They had a lot of assaults in the buses, and it was a lot of there was a lot of tension. And there were also various calls to remove religion from politics at this time. So in this kind of environment of tension, Archbishop Chiwanuka authored a pastoralator, one, to encourage people to take up their moral responsibility and their civic duties of engaging in the politics to determine their future in the forthcoming independence elections. And in his advice, one, he advised them on how to choose a political party, because there were several political parties, but some political parties never had constitutions. And away from that, he also advised them on how to choose a worthy candidate as Uganda was nearing the 1962 independence elections. And in his advice, I quote, he advised them, choose people who struggle for truth and justice, people who will everywhere help Buganda and Uganda to unite and to stand together like brothers. Now, this advice took me aback to recall and analyze what was going on. It is advice using the undertones of the Democratic Party, because truth and justice are the mottos of the Democratic Party. And as such, I argue in this chapter that Chiwanuka's pastoralator was more than a spiritual document. Rather, it was a political manifesto for moral citizenship. And he reframed Catholic political engagement as a moral obligation and democratic right. Away from all this, after the pastoralator, this increased a lot of tension between the church and the state. And as a result, one particular person, Musinya Joseph Sebaiga, was arrested because of translating this pastoralator in a language which was widely received. And because of this, there was another tension of censorship of Catholic publications like Muno. And all these kind of violence and tensions bring me to my second objective, which is the religio-political significance of Pope Paul the Sixth 1969 visit. Away from that environment of violence towards the Catholics, we're having the Pope setting foot not in any African country, but Uganda. Why Uganda? You have to read the thesis to know why he chose Uganda. Because Uganda was not boasting of the highest numerical index of the Catholics. At that moment, Nigeria had that kind of distinction. But why Uganda? The answer is in the thesis. And the question I seek to ask here, what was the religio-political significance of Pope Paul the 16th visit to Uganda, and how did it shape the church and state relations in Uganda? And I argue that, far from seeing this visit as merely a spiritual or a pastoral visit, we have to look at it as a religious political event. Because while Obote's government used the visit to consolidate national unity, the Catholic Church at this time, given what I've just talked about, the violence which was meted towards the Catholics, the Catholic Church used this visit to also reassert the church's autonomy. And for you to appreciate this context, you have to also understand, to appreciate the argument, you have to understand the context around this time. In 1963, I earlier said Obote was a little bit accommodative of the church initially, but later on, Ocam 1963, just 1 year after independence, friction started from his nationalization agenda, which saw the government take over denominational schools. And since the Catholic Church had heavily invested in some of these schools, this didn't go well with them. And in 1964, there was an endorsement of a one-party socialist system, and this provoked Catholic anxieties. Come 1964, in January, Obote restricts the entry of missionaries into Uganda, and he actually requested them or required them to revoke their citizenship and take on Ugandan citizenship if at all they wanted to spread the gospel in Uganda. In December 1964, still that year, Obote moves on to expel over 10 Komboni missionaries. In another context I want us to understand and appreciate in order to understand the entire findings here was the 1966 constitutional crisis. And scholars who were in Uganda, like Louis Pirot, who observed whatever was going on at this time, argued that this 1966 constitutional crisis also bruised the church and state relations in a way that the reverence which was initially preserved for the kings was now being transferred to the church leaders, and people now would go to the church leaders for any kind of guidance. And this did not go well for the government, which wanted to control the entire public life of Uganda. And in June 1969, just 2 months before the Pope could come, Obote had started his socialist agendas of moving to the left, and which were articulated in his Common Man's Charter. And that is why we see, those are some of the snippets which can make you understand why the Pope had to come to Uganda, or why the Pope came to Uganda. Whether by accident, but for me, I'm attributing it to some of these in this work. Largely, the Pope came to Uganda to concentrate the altar at Namugongol, Martha's Shrine, because of the beatification which had taken place and the invitation which had taken place around this time, as seen in this picture. Away from all this, for me, what was quite striking is that this was 2nd of August. That's when the Pope visited Namugongol. But before he could perform his main pastoral duty, the Pope goes to address the National Assembly of Uganda. And this is a little bit unprecedented. It had never happened elsewhere that the Pope would go and address a National Assembly. And that is the Pope in Parliament in that video. I'm just taking you back so that you can enjoy some of the UBC archives. Okay. That's not enough. When you look at the kind of speeches the Pope gives while in Parliament, you really see that he was trying to assert the church's autonomy, to show that the church was not engaged in any kind of ecclesiastical interference with state matters. And if I may quote, he says, "We avail ourselves of this opportunity also to declare to you what the church does and what the church does not do on this continent, and indeed wherever she carries her mission. He goes on to say, the church has no temporal interest of her own. She does not engage in politics in the proper sense of the term. She renders to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Nor does she intend, while performing her mission, to impose the particular traits of the so-called Western culture at the expense of the good human characteristics of African culture. He cautions them, have no fear of the church. She honors you. She educates honest and loyal citizens for you. She does not foment rivalries and divisions. And she seeks to promote health, liberty, social justice, and peace. Now, by emphasizing the church's tenets, we see that the Pope was trying to underscore a commitment to the national well-being, and in a way, he was trying to dispel any kind of suspicions of ecclesiastical interference in state matters. Away from that, I'll go straight to my objective 3. And in this objective, I look at the Amin era. And the question that I asked in this objective was, how did Idi Amin seek to curtail the visibility, autonomy, and moral authority of the Catholic Church in Uganda between 1971 and 1979? And the argument I make is that Amin's regime developed a paradoxical relationship with the church. This was quite ambivalent relationship. He had a lot of, on the surface, he projected himself as a religious unifier, as a God-fearing leader. Whenever he went to the Catholic Church, he would try to demonstrate that he is indeed a God-fearing person, as a person committed to interfaith harmony and unity. But beneath all his public performances lay a deep and calculated attempt to control, silence, and domesticate the church. I argue also that in Amin's Uganda, religion acted as a shield and a sword. It was a shield in a way that it sanctified his power. He hid behind religion. He hid again behind that kind of God-fearing image to project moral legitimacy. And it was a sword because he used it to suppress dissent, discipline critics, and police the boundaries of moral authority. And in this chapter, I look at four themes. That is, for starters, I look at Amin's state-led ecumenism. When he comes into power, he goes on to organize the 1971 Kabale Conference, which was an interreligious conference uniting all religions and trying to find ways of how to dispel any kind of conflicts between religions. Still that very year, he establishes a Department of Religious Affairs, which was under the Ministry of Internal Affairs, to coordinate religious affairs. But in my findings, I brought it out that this department later on became as a bureau of surveillance, where clerics were monitored, their summons had to be vetted and scrutinized to see what was going on. And in this environment of control, Amin later on turned to repression, and we saw the assassination of Catholic and Anglican church leaders with 1973 Father Clement Chigundu's assassination, where his car was found charred and burnt in Namamve forest because he was the editor of Muno and he was always critiquing the government. One from the 1972 Asian expulsion, he outright wrote about it, and also several other government atrocities. He was critiquing the government. And later on, the 1977, which is quite famous, that is famous for the wrong ways, for the wrong reasons, not famous. I'm using famous for lack of lexical items. That is Archbishop Janan Luwum's assassination. And I note that although there was repression, several other leaders did not give up. Rather, they resorted to something which I term as quiet resistance. And in this, we had the Catholic Medical Missionary Sisters and the Banyatareza Sisters, who, away from politics, now began to engage in a more theological form of moral resistance by extending charity to fugitives and victims of Amin's brutality. And later on, we also see Cardinal Emmanuel Nsubuga, having seen his contemporary Archbishop General Luwum murdered in such cold blood, he also resorts not to open criticism of the government, but rather to charity, and he founded the Good Samaritan Sisters and the Mapera Bakatayamba home to help. And these homes, initially that was the intention, but later on, around this time, they came to help a lot of fugitives of Amini's tyranny. And another theme I look at here is co-optation and symbolism. Like I said, Amin was always performing. He was just a performer. He would show that he was with the religious leaders supporting them. For instance, he supported the restitution of the remains of the missionaries in 1974. But as he was supporting them, still there was a lot of control. He tried to make sure that he suppresses Catholic visibility in this restoration period, because he had seen what restitutions bring about, and he was just riding onto this, given the fact that he had already won a lot of popularity when he returned the remains of Kabaka Mutesal. And when the opportunity came to also get some kind of political capital, he quickly supported the Catholics. And in 1975, Amin asked religious leaders to accompany him to the OAU summit, and this was another performance of another stature. And surpassing Obote in donations, Obote only gave Cardinal Nsubuga a car, but when Amin came into power, he gave all religious leaders Mercedes Benzes, and he donated his salary to the construction of Uganda Matters Shrine and all of that. And these are themes that I look at in this chapter. Away from that, I go to the findings in Objective 4, and in this objective, I examine the NRM efforts to remove the influence of religion in politics. And the question I ask here is derived from the NRM's political philosophy, which is laid in their 10-point program. In the 10-point program, when Museveni had just come to power, he argued that, or he stated that at independence, the country was quite divided along religious lines. And he vowed that under the NRM or under the movement system, he was going to find all possible ways of separating religion from power. However, the argument I make here is that the NRM government presents itself as a secular and a non-sectarian regime. However, but its version of secularism has been strategic rather than principled. In other words, it has not completely separated religion from politics, but it has only attempted to manage religion for its own benefit. And in this way, it has discouraged open political involvement by religious leaders. Yet it has also appropriated religion when it served political legitimacy. And they have, in my dissertation, I've documented a lot of campaigns when the NRM talked about or campaigned against religious sectarianism, right from his swearing-in speech, Museveni questioning the role of why religion should be a divisive factor, why should it be a matter? And later on, 3 years down the road, while addressing a Catholic theologians, he again reiterated the same. And in his 2010 speech at the coronation of the anniversary of Omukama Gafabusa, he also reiterated the same, telling religious leaders to stay in their lane because he has not baptized anyone, yet he knows the words to baptize, so they should also stick to their lane, as I document in this court. And this has been the rhetoric even in my motivation as I started. However, I argue the findings in this chapter show me that there have been a lot of contradictions in the NRM's secularist agenda. And the very government which discourages clergy from politics has been the same government appointing them to take political office. And that has been a quite big big controversy for me. I wasn't understanding that, because even in 1989, when the NRC was being convened and people were swearing in, or people contested to participate in the NRC, priests were participating in this, and Museveni was okaying it simply because all of us were, the entire country was in the movement political system. And during the swearing in, he actually almost got 2 priests to swear in, but the church intervened on matters of the canon law that priests should not participate in direct politics. Another contradiction which I see is that there has been secularism in principle, but at the same time religious integration in practice. And in this I see that Museveni promotes a secular state just in rhetoric, but he invokes religious symbolism for political legitimacy. And the example I cite here is the 2010 National Prayer Day. For those who recall, the president looked at himself, or he called himself a Moses to all of us, the Ugandans, having saved us from the tyranny and brought us to this promised land, which is Canaan. I don't know how many have reached in this Canaan. And another thing which I see, another contradiction, was patronage as a control mechanism. And with all other governments which I've looked at, which I analyze in this thesis, this government has mastered the art of patronizing clerics through gifts, a lot of donations in the massive construction projects, and these kind of blurs and turns the religious leaders into political allies rather than moral critics. Away from all this, okay, I didn't know that I have reached this time of the conclusion. I was still enjoying this. I'll conclude. And on a conclusive note, I note that across the decades that I look at in this work, the Catholic Church has not been a passive bystander, but an institution whose moral voice and institutional reach has placed it in a recurring interplay with political power. And whereas several governments have tried to restrain the church from political commentary and political discourse, the Catholic Church has resisted this and has continued its moral responsibility of guiding through its intervention from the pastoral letter of Archbishop Ngendo Tshimba to the symbolism in the Pope Paul's visit, to its endurance under Amin's repression, and its negotiations under the NRM. While I looked at the Catholic Church and state struggle for visibility in the public life, I suggest several other areas for research. And for this, I pull out 3. There is need to analyze or to examine the role of poverty in fostering clientelization of religious institutions. There is also a need to examine the religious leaders' sense of commitment to the prophetic mission of the church amidst growing political pressures and material inducements. And finally, there is also a need to examine the Vatican's influence on the national level and the manner of the church's involvement with the politics in the national context. In terms of contribution to scholarship, this study has historicized the church and state relations, particularly Uganda's Catholic Church and state relations across multiple regimes. And by that, it has provided a long-term lens instead of focusing on isolated moments. In the study, I introduce a concept of church visibility as an analytical framework. And I use this as a new way of understanding how religious institutions exercise political agency, not only through action, but also through strategic presence and absence, because even silence is also communication in a way. And in the study, I reinterpret African secularism away from the clear separation of church and state, that is the European secularism. I come up with African secularism as a pragmatic I reinterpret this secularism as a pragmatic and political tool, showing how in Uganda secularism is not used to separate religion from politics, but to manage and mobilize it for state legitimacy. I have about 3 publications. There is a book chapter which is already out by the Makerere University Press, and the book is in Reinventing Uganda, Political Imagination. I have one article accepted by the Makerere Historical Journal, and that I authored with my supervisor. And I also have another article under review. I've gotten the comments, which I'm working on, that is under review with the Journal of Church and State. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Anatoli. Thank you so much for your confidence and passion about your topic. I was wondering whether you have conflict of interest there. But also I have to confess my conflict of interest. When Dean asked me to chair, I said I will accept on the condition that Anatoli will maybe come to the Department of Regional Peace Studies. I think that's why you fit most. I also have conflict of interest with the critical reader. I was telling him that how come that you are not in our department? But because he's working on migration, political violence, I said, you people, you are misplaced. So Lwassa, I think you are misplaced in history. Kindly come to our department. So I just also have a privilege to introduce Professor Farouk. Without Farouk, you wouldn't have managed. We have someone you can't do without, Florence Birugwa. Thank you so much for your commitment, but also I want to introduce Sister Professor DePio. Sister DePio has had many Nobel Prizes. I remember one time you were advisor of the Pope Pontifical, so I hope you consulted her. Otherwise, yeah. Thank you so much, Can we have the opponent please come and engage the candidate? Okay, after maybe, would we need to stretch now a bit? After the opponent, we shall stretch, and then we'll continue with our engagement. Thank you so much, Dr. Simbe. Kindly come and engage the candidate.
Thank you. Professor Mbabazi, for your mercy and for giving me this chance to interact with this thesis, which I read with keen interest. I'm very much pleased with the event so far. And before we stretch, allow me to just train a little bit your backs for this Socratic conversation. I want to thank the supervisors who have accepted the honor to work with the candidates to this level, and I don't know for which fountain of wisdom they thought me fit to come and be the hired person to come and disagree and at least show to Anatoli that you have to defend your thesis, or else I'm hired to make you fail. So that is my job. So I want to stick to my TORs, and as the devil's advocate, it's a very uncomfortable job. But I hope today's we're in the purgatory, so I'm going to be the angel's advocate. The thesis before us, under the scrutiny now by the appointed jury, returns a critical historical gaze at the relations between the Catholic Church and the Ugandan state over the past 6 decades. Here, the doctoral candidate, Anatoli Lwassampijja, weaves a 4-pronged argument demonstrating how the Catholic Church in Uganda, focused on Kampala Archdiocese to be specific, has remained a politically significant public actor whose voice and silence engage with the state power, sometimes as a partner in nation building, some other times as a fierce critic, and still in other times as a wary negotiator caught in a complex clientelist web. First, Anatoli argues that this church serves not just as a passive spiritual entity, but also as an active political actor, leveraging its excessive infrastructures, schools, hospitals, parishes, in reaching out to a multitude of everyday forms of public lives. The second prong of argument goes as follows. The Ugandan state has proceeded from co-optation and containment as current strategies of engagement with the Catholic Church in Uganda. On the one hand, one regime after the other, the state has often started with co-opting the church through patronage, symbolic recognition, and selective partnerships. On the other hand, different regimes since independence have also deployed containment through fierce repression, intimidation, and rhetorical delegitimization. Third, Anatoli maintains that the church's influence can best be understood through visibility. Visibility here presented as the lens, as the conceptual grid, in my view, which encompasses both overt actions, public statements, high-profile liturgies, mass rallies, etc., and also strategic silences that signals dissent without direct confrontation. Fourth and lastly, the Ugandan version of secularism has functioned much less as a principled separation of religion and politics, of church and state, but more as an instrumentally applied doctrine. That is, secularism in Uganda's contemporary political history is a tool for political management rather than an ideological commitment, so much so that the state has not afforded to fully expunge the domain of the church from politics without losing access to the social and symbolic capital that the latter provides. So put together, Lwassampijja sums up the above arguments in what he terms as the endurance of political Catholicism in Uganda's contemporary nation building, which in my reading is the church not only as a religious institution, but also, and perhaps most importantly, as a political agent, both autonomous and complicit in her relation with the states, sometimes invoking moral authority to assert its visibilities in public life, and in other times shaping and contesting political legitimacy of the states. The thesis claimed contribution, as I read it, can be stated as follows. In presenting the story of the relationship between the Catholic Church and the state as having been defined by the key 3 C's: cooperation, competition, conflict. This study foregrounds the quest for visibilities on the part of the church through moral voice and strategic silence as a form of political agency. The thesis, Lwassampijja states, is anchored in a social constructivist ontology and drawing on interpretivism as its epistemological standpoint. It further employs hermeneutics, as argued by Willem Dilthey, in examining the ways in which church actors crafted narratives, engaged in moral positioning, and invoked religious legitimacy in response to the state's repression or in context of contested authority. The research design chosen by the candidates consists of a historical one. Here, Lwassampijja takes cues from John Toch, in his very famous, notable book entitled The Pursuit of History. Quoting that, open quotes, a good historical research depends on the careful formulation of a research problem, the critical appraisal of sources, and the continuous testing of conclusions against the evidence. This is on page 59. So on page 18 of the thesis, which I read, Lwassampijja returns us to where this Q is taking case. Lwassampijja on page 18 of the thesis presents his statement of the research problem in the following terms, open quotes. Existing literatures on religion and politics in Uganda has predominantly focused on political religious groupings that have emerged during and after the late 19th century religious wars. Other studies have focused on politicizing Protestant missions during the colonial period, the formation of denominationally aligned political parties, and the legacy of sectarian divisions in shaping electoral politics. Many of these works, Anatoli further elaborate, have prioritized the Anglican Church's historical alliance with state power, thereby ignoring the Catholic experience and contribution. The thesis, and I will add here, therefore, addresses this historiographical gap. Quite high voltage English. I want to congratulate Lwassampijja for this contribution. But here's my first question. Besides the identified historiographical gap, what else consists of the research problem carefully formulated by Lwassampijja's study? In other words, I'm asking, how is John Tosh's persuasive advice taken seriously in this thesis?
Well, thank you so much. That's an interesting one. Okay. And I would approach it this way, that besides the historiographical gap, or maybe you may rephrase that question again so that I can, because I seem to have missed the question.
Great. Your statement of the research problem, where is the venue for the reader to draw the research problem, seems to have stated in very bold and eloquent terms the historiographical gap.
Yes.
The gap is that much of the scholarship has paid comparatively little attention to the Catholic experience and contributions. Very interesting points.
Yes.
So my question here is, so beside the historiographical gap, what is your research problem? If you put historiographical gap aside, what else are you intellectually preoccupied with?
Well, thank you so much. Now that is more clear. My research problem is drawn on the fact that there is constant restriction of the clergy from engaging in political discourse. And the state, which restricts the clergy from this, at times relies on the church for political legitimacy. But at the same time, it does not accommodate the church's commentary on political issues. And that is the conundrum that I seek to understand.
Fair enough.
And that brings about the struggle for visibility.
I have a follow-on question on that.
Yes.
I'm still in the purgatory. I'm not sure whether I'm going with you to heaven.
All right.
Let me do a follow-on there. So
yes.
you claim in your thesis that there has been comparatively limited scholarly attention extended to the Catholic Church in Uganda.
Yes.
That's a very bold claim, Anatoli. So I'm asking, shouldn't you prove to us this comparatively limited attention, particularly in view of the thorough literature review of the extant Catholic-leaning scholarship, not least starting with John Mary Waligo,
Yes.
J.J. Carney, Jonathan Earl, and indeed I will add a very important omitted reference in your work, Diba.
Yes.
Father Diba, in his seminal work, 18 in Uganda. Of all the scholarship available to us, which is Catholic leaning, contributed by Catholic theologians, historians, and anthropologists, what is it about this comparatively little attention thus far extended to the Catholic Church?
Thank you so much for that question. And this gives me the opportunity to highlight it's either you misread me, but my issue or my argument was there is comparatively limited scholarship on the Catholic Church and state relations in Uganda. However, in my literature, I go on to talk about most of this literature. J.J. Carney talks about Catholic modern leadership, and he zeroes on prominent Catholic leaders. And here I am looking at Catholic Church and state relations. When you talk about Jonathan Earl's work, he is largely talking about Benedicto Chiwanukal, key political figures. And he does not delve into what I'm trying to do here, looking at the Catholic Church and state relations in key historical moments where they struggled for visibility. And that is missing in all these works.
Record yourself. Now, this is not what I read. I'm very happy about this. This is musical, what you are saying here. This is great, but this is not in your work. You had literally presented to us this kind of scenario. We are on a menzani at a scholarly butcher place, and there is this huge volume on the one hand of Protestant scholarship, which is 50 kg. And then there's Catholic scholarship, which is 10 kgs. And you are saying the menzani is not balanced.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What is that which exists in the Catholic leading scholarship that you are pushing against? And so we can see if you do have it now. So I'm happy to hear this. And I will.
No, I have it somewhere in my literature review.
I will put it at the rest.
What I have to do is to actually bring it up front in the chapter 1.
I will very much be happy with that if you bring it further, because
Sure.
you don't serve us our Luombo when you are belly cheek. Bring your Luombo forward. You said on page 52. I move on.
Page what?
Page 52.
Okay.
I'm moving on, and I will be gracious to read it for you. You state that the historical research design, which you chose, was particularly suitable for this study because it enabled the triangulation of various data sources. In addition, and this is where my queries is stemming from, in addition to providing a strong, you say it, strong framework for evaluating authenticity, reliability, and historical context of both primary and secondary sources. Here goes my second question. It is really about authenticities, and you can guess what the question. Why was such an important issue in the first place? The quest for authenticity and reliability. For yet a study that has told us that is drawing from social constructivism as its ontological standpoint and interpretivism as its epistemological standpoint. So in other words, I'm asking, if I may break it down.
Yes.
Why obsess with authenticity, objectivity, reliability, and validity for a study which, I quote, page 52, privileges subjective meanings?
All right. Thank you so much for this. Why do I emphasize authenticity, reliability? I do this just to ensure the rigorous nature and the credibility of the study, in the way that you will realize that even while I conducted several interviews, not all of them were included in this work because I was sieving out several issues. Some interviews, we all know the disadvantages of oral sources of constructing knowledge and all of that, and where there were misinformation, that kind of information was triangulated with the archival information, and you could see that some interviews are put out. And that is why I also talk about the authenticity, the reliability of some of these methodological methods that I use.
I think you have a much better defense in Dilthey. William Dilthey has a very strong articulated corresponding interest in social research, and particularly a qualitative design which you chose in how to guard against these hovering costs of reliability. It is important that you have very reliable data. It is important that it is valid, but the obsession is differently articulated in a qualitative research than it is in a quantitative research. You have a ghost of quantitative horror hovering over your head here, and you can just let it pass. That will be my take. But I will follow up on that.
That is well noted. Thank you so much.
I will follow up on that, yeah. And I think you need also to note, because on page 56, you come full blast in that ghost hovering over you. 54 is very telling. You seem to be obsessed with guarding against bias, analytical detachment, accurate reflection, acknowledging potential sources of bias. My good gracious. This study is about subjective meanings. Bias is part and parcel of the music here. You are throwing in the tune, which is making us all dance. This is Juice on the Move, where we entertain bias. And this bias should be not only acknowledged, but dealt with in kids' gloves, because it's a welcome guest in this qualitative research design. Why obsessed with the bias and guarding against it? It is much more counterproductive guarding with bias than embracing it for what it also brings, which is a particular subjective data. All the more important for your research design. What do you say about it? You can just note.
No, I have a response to that.
All right.
If this work was up to me, and without the conversion of Makerere University, I would have taken up that kind of stance. But initially, I was taking that kind of stance, and I was spelling out my biases and everything. I was kind of articulate with my positionality, just to guide people to see where I'm coming from. However, I used to sound more of a Catholic activist in a way. And that was coming off as something not welcome in these walls. And if at all in future I ever get to develop this into a book, I'll own it up and do whatever I wish to do with this. But for purposes of conventionality.
So literally you are telling me your feet are still in the river and the crocodiles are in the river, so you cannot start playing. I hold the red pen, but the red pen is not applied for this. Let me tell you, Makerere graduated in 1922. That's when Makerere graduated its stuff. It opened its gates and it moved on. You were on the spot for your thesis. Don't give Makerere's gates so much power over your thesis. You bring Makerere to agree with your thesis. That's what I'm saying. And you need again, I'm saying this because I've been so very much convinced about the grand research design which you state out and the kind of sources you mobilize to get. I mean, again, I'll go back to Dilthey. Dilthey's famous human sciences, research in human sciences and society. Has that particular 6th chapter. We talk about what is humanetics here. Here, when you are questing for an epistemologically reality that already we are intermingled with in terms of social experience. You know, you're talking about the intermingling of social experience, and our positions about the ways of knowing are already contaminated by historical and social experience. It means that bias is already well catered for. The issue is not really, as you say it, analytical detachment. I will argue the issue at stake here is critical distancing. Critical distancing from the object of study. And that's, we have a whole gazillion of literature about how to go about critical distancing. Not to sound the deputy chancellor of Kampala Archdiocese, but to sound Anatoli, the reader of chancellery. Let's go on. You say that these studies delves into the realm of church-state relations with specific focus on the post-colonial Uganda, taking particularly the period from the transition to independence, 1960 to 66, to Museveni's eras, 68 to present. Here comes my third compounded question. Now this is compounded, you can take some notes. When does the present, I ask, when does the present in this historical thesis end? When does it end? Anatoli telling us to the present. I'm reading a historical thesis. Is it 3rd of November at 11 a.m. that Anatoli is still researching church and state relations? Is it we have seen his main protagonist in the chapter 7, Cyprian Kizito Lwanga, being late? He's already late. We have another archbishop. He's not here. So what is this present? When is the present ending? That's my first question. And coupled with that, I'm also asking, and what is the post-colonial in this thesis? Is post-colonial in this thesis synonymous with post-independence? If so, why? And if not, what should we do with Stephen? There is a reference to Stephen Ellis. So if the post-colonial is not synonymous with the post-independence, then what should we do with Stephen Ellis' persuasive advice, which was published in 2002, which you eminently quote, that writing contemporary history requires going much further into the past than 40 or 50 years ago. So should we add 25 years of this new millennium to be deducted or added to Ellis' proposal calculus, so that we understand the one who's researching 2025 has gotten the 50 or 60 years? Because in Ellis, 50 years or 40 years take them to exactly your starting point of 1960s. But if you apply the 40s now, it is just taking you to the 70s.
Yeah.
What is this present and what is this post-colonial?
All right, thank you so much. What is the present? For the present, I was largely looking at the NRM government, and that also informs the historical period of my time scope. NRM since 1986. Is the present, when does the present end? Mm-hmm. That's a tough one, I accept.
Yeah.
However,
yeah,
I take the position of, it is really, really tough for me.
Let me volunteer you Sam Kasasi.
Please.
Let me volunteer Sam Kasasi. There is a very interesting French historian.
Yes.
Le Goff. Le Goff writes a very interesting short book. Should we divide history into periods? It's an argument on periodization.
Okay.
So it's what I'm pointing to is in your subtitle there,
yes.
saying something of from since 1962 to present. When you are writing a historical thesis, it leaves people wonder whether are you now transitioning into sociology and anthropology and religious studies.
I see.
And all that. History has gotten to be bracketed to be much safer. So you can say
from
up to 2015 or so, and there's no problem. The issue is Le Goff will help you to understand the analytical device that periodizations afford you and to work with its limitation. Because Legoff has a very sophisticated double-edged argument that periodization liberates, it emancipates the historian as well as castrates the historian's imagination. So you take clue from that.
Sure, I will take note of that. Thank you so much.
And that's my casas. Now that's the bonanza. The next casas will be paid for. Let's move on. Let's move on. I want to come to yet a very interesting piece as I move. We are doing well so far, but I'm still in the purgatory. Your role is to take me to heavens, or else I pull you back to hell. You definitely seem to suggest that there's a very pretty straightforward reason which you give in the thesis, and I want to stop at that reason, because there's something telling here which you are not telling us. On page 54, there is a very pretty straightforward reason as to why this study deliberately omits the early 1980s in its contemporary scope. You bracket that period, the 1980s. So that's, you say, while religious institutions were indeed present in that period and offered humanitarian and moral support, their involvement was, I quote, largely indirect and fragmented rather than institutionally coordinated, end quote. Page 54. I'm definitely not persuaded by this rationale. I'm not persuaded that the reason why you bracket the 60s is, hey, these guys were just fragmented and they were just institutionally non-coordinated. They escaped the film. They evaporated. And that's why you cannot give them attention. Is this empirically substantiated? Is this reason otherwise empirically valid? I don't think so. A more palatable reason, at least insofar as we can marshal desperate evidence of Cardinal Nsubuga's decisive actions during the Luero Triangle Bush War, could be, and this could be my reason, and I say a big cold here. You have to push back against my cold.
I see.
Perhaps it could have been that this particular period could be politically sensitive, and research sensibilities with oral sources characteristic of this period could not allow you to do as much homework as you did for previous section. So, does Dr. Lwassampijja still think that the Obote II regime was a disorganized and non-formalized one? That's the question I have. Do you not think that Obote II was an organized and formalized regime? Not worthy of your ink?
Thank you so much for that important question. However, I still stand by my reason around this time. Though I also appreciate your insights into why I should. I also appreciate your insights. But this time, I argue, church leadership was a little bit fragmented in a way. You realize around this time, even in the Anglican and the Catholic Church, there were ethnic undertones and they were divided to take up one uniform stance in their relationship with the state. And if you critically read the works of Musana and Christine Mpiango here, there is that book on Ugandan churches and political centers. You realize, you will appreciate that while some church leaders were supporting and speaking vocally against Obote, there was no uniformity. Others were in support of Obote, and some even decided to keep quiet during the Luero Triangle because they had already kept quiet during Obote's massacre. And that kind of research, that kind of literature brings out some of these reasons. And that's why I argue here that I will skip this period, or I omit this period deliberately, because it doesn't allow me a comprehensive institutional analysis of the church and state relations in this era. However, J. Kani has talked about Nsubuga around this time and what he does
bracket whatever period you want to bracket in your study. You are also even further encouraged choose this period you are going to intervene with. But look, you have a duty, whereas you have a right to bracket a historical period. You have a duty to convince us. Why? And that's what I'm saying. Look, there is a great deal of reasons, and yours is the weakest of the ladder. We have in the 1982, between 1982 to 1984, a very much pregnant and politically engaged Catholic Church. It might be true for the Anglican part. The Anglican part is very much on the fence, caught between a rock and a hard place, sometime wanting to know, because the Anglican Church, with its just previous decades of losing a very important archbishop, a big constituency of the bishop's house is Luo speaking. Remember, the biggest constituency of bishop's house by then is Luo speaking, and another one is Southwestern. So when you combine the UPC concentration of attention in Southwestern and Eastern and the Luo speaking bishops, they are speaking tongue in cheek. I will excuse you and I will really give you a very warm hug if this was Anglican Church study. But when it comes to the Catholic Church, there is, on the contrary, ample evidence that it is particularly at around 1982 when Cardinal Subuga will reactivate the Uganda Episcopal Conference. We have a very important letter that came in November 1984, the Episcopal Pastoral Letter that comes out in 84. It's perhaps the most recent letter. And how do you dare imagine a revamped Episcopal Conference as absence of an organized church, as absence of an institutional church? That is institution par excellence. Episcopal Conference is at work. I will still hold my guard. Maybe, and true to historical pregnancy of that period, it is hugely relating on oral sources, which so many who will have given them are inexistent. And two, I mean, the political sensitivities, the 80s ushering in this government, and there are so many skeletons in these 80s, no one wants to go and face. That is a palatable scholarly reason enough to get you off the hook.
Thank you so much for that. And for a comment on that, I will have to find a better justification on why I have to leave out this period.
Alhamdulillah. Let's go. Alhamdulillah. He has consented. We are in the purgatory together. Let me carry on this engagement. The fifth, I'm getting toward the end. You say, and this is very interesting, the archival, I'm getting back to the methodological terrain. The archival and other documentary sources on page 59 of your thesis, you noted, consisted of the empirical backbone of this study, you said. And the archival method employed was, I quote, not a search for objectivity, but a critical excavation of competing truth embedded in historical memory and institutional discourse. I felt overjoyed when I read this. I was like, cool. Finally, you are serving me some very nice salad here. So, but here is my fifth question. How were these competing truths in the archives read? What did you take and what did you leave out, if any, from these archives? I'm asking this more so because clause D, point 3 in your written document analysis worksheet in the appendix, you do see appendix E of your work, which is attached to your thesis, does not tell us how you engaged with what you found out in those papers. I'm interested as a curious reader to know how did you read the archives. You tell us in your mark sheet, in your worksheet, what you did in terms of finding and what you took note, but how did you? Because it is a shopping mall. You enter that. Did you shop from the toes to the sugar canes to the bowl and the cutlery, or did you make choices? And if so, what informed that choice making in the archive reading?
All right. In the archives, this study was organized thematically, and from the archives, I tried to sieve out archival materials which were feeding into the themes that I initially intended to interrogate. And away from that, the archives had a lot of material, I should say. And what did I leave out and what did I choose? I chose things which were, I chose material which was serving the purpose of the themes. However, even when I got material or obtained material which was not directed to the themes, that is material I reserved for future projects. However, even in the archives, I also got, or especially in the Mission of African Archives in Rome, I obtained material which I wouldn't at any one moment bring out in the public, because these were materials which would, in a way, taint the image of the church in a way. And as a Catholic, I had to.
Examination is real.
Yes.
We are not serving Holy Communion here.
Yeah. No, not serving Holy Communion. But I didn't, just to avoid and to protect my career, because I'm still working in these archives for the longest time. So not to taint them as I'm still starting. There is material I wouldn't, and I can never disclose to anyone.
Fantastic, that's great. So, this is very interesting stuff. Your thematic analysis is impoverished. You need to flesh it up with what you have just said, because there is an opportunity now to tell us. You seem to have gotten themes that informed, and this is why, in addition to critical discourse analysis, you coupled it with thematic analysis. So you tell us right there as you are going over the methodological choices about sources consulted, you also have an opportunity to insert your thematic analysis approach, and then you'll be left off the hook, because it makes a lot of sense.
That's
One
right.
will also ask, how did you listen to the oral sources you listened to? I mean, what did you take from what you listened to? Because you did some interviews, and you said 2 women out of the 6. I mean, you have a 6 list on your appendix. 2 is not bad. Out if there are 4. You could have gotten the 3rd one here, but that is a big loss for another postdoc. That is postdoc research. But how did you listen to them? You just tell us that you had interviewed and they were great. You give us an interview checklist, an interview working document worksheet that tells us, yes, when was it said? But what did you do? Ranajat Guha tells us a very important line here. Both archival and oral sources are to be taken with a grain of salt. You need to listen against oral and archival sources. Guha is very important here. You may summon him, helping you to convince us that you were exercising a very serious critical historical imagination and critical historical reconstruction as you go about that source. That's second Kasase.
Thank you so much.
But let's go to page 60 as I want to get a little pedant now. On page 60, you said something quite mind-boggling, and this is Louise White. You have already talked about Louise Purette. Now, Louise Purette is a very good buddy of yours, at least in your brain. And Louise is written L-O-U-I-S-E. That's Purette. But Louise White is L-U-I-S-E. And you are... Louise protégés are going to come for you. I'm going to come back to these areas and stuff. The other one is big time and is still alive and moves around this campus. Henry Medard. You have added an R there on Medard. Medard is going to come for you. But that said, whites whom you quote, and I think I'm quoting from your thesis. And I want to be very much clear about my concern here. I'm quoting from your thesis, page 60. The value of these interviews lies not only, I italicize not only. You say the values of these interviews lies not only in the factual content, but also in the meaning, anxieties, and interpretive strategies embedded in the narratives, end quotes. Not only Louise White. So, my question is, are these White's word or the faithful paraphrase of them? Because you are paraphrasing here. I was so much looking forward to seeing the page number. I want you to tell me at this moment whether Louise is telling you, because we've read together at different times. I don't know which version of the Vampires, Louise Vampire's book you are reading. But Louise to write that the interviews not only, the values of them not only lie in factual content. Louise is not obsessed with factual content. Is it not only or not just? I want you to clarify. Is it a not only or not just? Clarify that. And give me a page number of Louise, because now it is my reading of Louise White's Vampires against your reading.
Yes.
And I'm happy to be wrong.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate the comment. And this could have been a misreading of Louise White, and that is why I'm not quoting her directly, and I'm just writing my understanding of what. And I stand to be corrected on that. And I have to cross-check that.
I think you have to cross-check that, because this is a very pregnant quote. It's a very pregnant quote. And you know, in view of your research design and your qualitative data, particularly having used the interviews here, you need to read primary texts on their own rights.
Sure.
You seem to have gone through a detour to access Louise White here, and you need paraphrase is a very important paraphrase, a very important writing device. It has gotten its limitation, and you have to guard as a scholar against uses and misuses of paraphrase. You are on very slippery ground there.
Okay.
Because my Louise White, I really want Louise White to be reestablished and reconstituted for what she really said. And that's a very important seminal work, which define our historical career as people who use oral sources.
Sure.
My seventh question. You said, it can perhaps be easily understood. I am asking it from yet another context. It is further stated in your thesis that using a critical discourse analysis alongside the thematic analysis, you had some 4 key themes. There are some 4 key themes which you said have emerged within qualitative data collected and so analyzed. What are those 4 themes? Clientelism, moral authority, political repression, this church visibility an emerging theme? Isn't this actually the chosen analytical grid through which you made sense of your findings and you made your discovery intelligible to your readers. You eloquently, and didn't record you, but I heard you in your presentation saying that visibilities is my analytical framework. And I think it is just the way I also understand it in your work. It is the conceptual grid through which you enter into the readings of these 4 moments. So to say that adding which is lurking behind it.
My pronouncement on that is very simple, and it comes to appreciate you for reading my work closely. That while I was presenting, it's very clear to me, and I indicated
your methodology and the literature review and the analysis you make of your primary data. It cannot just be an emerging one. That said, you said on page 52, another very aching note, that there was thematic coding. Hey, thematic coding also happened here. But there is no mention whatsoever about how this coding was done in the first place. Similarly, I'm also asked, or perhaps forced, that researcher clearance and I'll come back to research clearance, but this thematic coding we make allusion to, it is something of the methodological templates. You seem to be working with a blueprint somewhere in your thesis, in your thematic analysis section there, and you're inserting coding there. So tell us a little bit about that coding, because it's a very gratuitous mention, which you drop there, you move on, and yet it is loaded with implications. Was it in vivo coding? Was it computer aided or not? Was it manual? And if so, why the coding? If some of them are already a priori existent.
I really want to believe that's an issue of language, and it wasn't clear, and that's why I used that, just for lack of better words. But I have to drop coding because I was just using clear a little bit, because there are themes. This is work across different regimes and use themes even in these different regimes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
You are not any less doctoral.
It's an issue of language.
You're fantastic. I agree. You will still work majestically and have your lunch very well if you drop coding into your work.
Sure. Thank you so much.
The same thing applies for your clearing. You make mention of ethical clearance. So there are ethical clearance which are banned. But I'm not much interested in your REC and your UNCST thing. Those are bureaucratic ethics procedures. What I'm interested in is that you clearly mentioned that, still on that page 52, on page 62, that the study complied with both national and institutional ethical standards governing research involving human participants and archival material, end quote. Can you spell out clearly and explicitly these ethical standards complied with? They are mentioned as a signpost, but you don't take us to where they are spelled out as a dish. What are these ethical clearances you are glossing over?
The ethical clearances on, ethical guidelines on anonymity of your participants, protecting your participants. But when it comes to archival, I talked about institutional clearances because to access archives, which I accessed, there were several standards. There are several requirements you had to meet in a way, and some of them included the handling of the material itself, but also I think that's what I can speak to at the
right.
Yes.
Now, research ethics is not a footnote in scholarly endeavor, and research ethics is not a cornered, bracketed in the parenthesis mention to get off the hook of Professor Awichi's hook or whoever is there. Is this Professor Omala at the DRDT? It's a very important section of the work. I will argue that because you involved participants who were responded by way of interviews, I mean, some of the questions about this period, including Amin's, are potentially destabilizing and traumatizing questions. Some of the, perhaps the question, but given the reading of particularly that chapter, which I'm going to come back to, the chapter on Amin, have very serious considerations in terms of how much did you open the wound in the quest for your data, and how much bandage did you do or cared to do, even post interview guide. So issues of research ethics involving interviews, there's a whole body of literature about that. It is not just about bulleting, anonymity, confidentialities, privacy, and particularly for confidentiality, you have to spell what does it mean for this study. Some voices will insist that this is my story, and thank God no one has ever asked me about this thing. Let me restitute my memory back to affinity. Please mention it to me. You come in with an umbrella of anonymity. No, in the name of anonymity. A respondent. You need to know what is the respondent saying of REC and USCC. These have gotten agencies, they are moral agents and rights full owners of their terms. Some will be saying that this you take from me and this is my thing, but please take the story, don't take my name. Other will be like, I don't just want to be just, can you avail me this research? Can you give me back the thing in Uganda? All those things, you have to cater for them.
Sure, you're right.
Someone is both online and physical. You have to choose which church you belong to here, man. This is the Catholic defense. We do not entertain is and was, lukewarmers here. Yeah? Either online and you go to the parliamentary, to the graduation square, or and you deal your confessions, because we're going to deal with. So that said, the ethical bit, ethical standard cannot just as a big umbrella tree that is hiding a forest. Spread them out and go one by one as far as your context was concerned.
Sure.
Let me to my peniptial issue. Chapter 6, my favorite hot chocolate, chapter 6, is the most thrilling and perhaps the most pregnant of all your chapters in my reading. Full of discoveries and razor sharp analysis. I want to stick with you the purgatory for a while with this chapter. Before you leave me, Anatoli, I want to congratulate you upon writing this chapter. It's a very, very well done chapter. Now, I hardly congratulate people as an opponent, but let me come with my charge. Upon finishing reading this chapter, one is perhaps forced or compelled to ask the following question. And I really would like to take the verve and the guys that call it the vibe, me I call it the verve, the analytical verve with which you wrote chapter 6, deploy it also in chapter 1. Chapter 1 is Vigenderako, is and was, you are having a lot of laxity in style, I'll come back to that, but you have a particular dexterity when you're dealing with Amin. Maybe you think that the ghost is going to still hovering over you, but that said, as I read the chapter and particularly getting into the thick of it at page 162, I was forced to ask, why did Amin and his henchmen go after Archbishop Luwum's life and not Archbishop Subuga's? That's my chilling question. And I'm speaking it with a lot of, an abundance of humility and the fountain of care. Is the answer to this question lying in great part in Subuga's internalization of the power of silence? A very important title of a book by Robert Cardinal Sarah, The Power of. Are we seeing the strategic use of silence as the thing that got Subuga off the death rope? Or in Luwum's overt sympathies with these Luo kinmen's during the times of the Amin's great party, particularly with Lange and Acholi soldiers? What accounts for one archbishop on the guillotine and the other off the hook? This is the question that I carry with me after reading your razor sharp analytical chapter.
All right. Thank you so much for that wonderful question. However, as a historian, I avoid giving direct answers. And all the answers that can fall, I've split them out. Where I talked about Subuga's quiet resistance and tragic silence in a way. However, I also bring out there are several schools of thoughts which explain why Luwum made such a gruesome death at the hands of Amin's henchmen. And I want to think, when you look at, in history they have what they call the sparking factor. I really want to attribute all this to the strategic use of silence, because the sparking incident which brings Luwum's life to an end was when he brings out things they had discussed in an enclosed meeting, and he goes on to spell them out, and Amin hears about some of these. And even when Amin interrogates Luwum clearly just talks about what had happened in that meeting. And the failure to conceive and conceal some of that could have brought to his death, could have led to his death. However, we cannot rule out connections with the Luo, since Obote was Luo and Amin already suspected that Luwum was collaborating with the rebels to oust him. So there are a lot of suspicions, and I leave them at that because there is no conclusive evidence as to what claimed Luwum's death. And even I document his burial, and you can see at the nature of his burial ceremony, it's all like mystery. It is all conceived, it's all restricted and restrained. That is why I leave it a little bit open, and I give out all these reasons without standing firm one particular reason as having been responsible for saving Suboga's life. But what's about that silence?
Fantastic. You have a word which is a pregnant half a word, and that's half a year or so we celebrated years of Amin's end of very, very conspicuously looming era in our historical cupboard that we need to come to grip with as Uganda, and chapter is giving us a penultium lights onto that moment. Two books have just hit the shelf this year. One by Derek Peterson, Amin's popular history of Uganda. Peterson's sitting on the floor and gazing at the Ugandan society from above, history from below. Mahmoud Mamdani comes in and gives us a book, Slow Poison. Idi Amin's Museveni and the Making of Modern Uganda. 3 of the chapters there, loom large on Amin. Mamdani is again, sees of the pinnacle, looking at the Ugandan society from above. We have gotten a history from above, a history from below. You are giving us a history from the middle. That's what you are in the middle there. And I want to urge you that this is a very interesting moment where we are intellectually thirsty for that moment. Not just in the Anglican fraternities of our 16th of February is a Matter Day holiday, but also for this persona. How does in 76 Subuga is coming out with a very ancient pastoral letter and still it in 77 already at the end of 76 focusing is turning around organizing of the centennial celebration of the church. And now we see a very, very ubiquitously present closing shop on his pastoral work and go there. Rome is coming at the main street. Sarah's book is a great miss here. You need to engage with Sarah. The Power of Silence. The subtitle of Sarah's book is against dictatorship against dictatorship in the fight for political justice. It's a very, very interesting book. But you have considered very well, and you have given us some very good material to work with here. My last, 9th and last query. So, in the studies recommendations, as you went down your study, but religious institutions, here I read the Catholic Church, as you said in your introduction, should, I open quote, invest in historical literacy, end quote, page 216. Don't you, with hindsight now, don't you retrospectively find this recommendation quite presumptuous, particularly as safely kept by this very church? And moreover, a church has gotten church history and pastoral evolution as entrenched syllabi in the formation of its personnel. Don't you find it presumptuous? You're coming from historical amnesia and you are struck by obedience.
No,
won't you want to put some water in your wine?
I have a response to that.
Yes.
And my response to that aside, why do I comment this? On several occasions, and looking at Archbishop Cyprian Wanga and his and several commentary on
I think
the fact that a priest can die and government comes to collect a gun from this person's residence and this person has been a spy for the government, that points to the fact that they also have to appreciate and learn from this history.
But the thing is, the problem I have is the literacy as the word. Historical literacy is very suggestive.
I think that's an issue of language.
Of infantilization.
Sure.
You cannot tell these people to be historically literate. Maybe they have to come to full tandem with historical consciousness of the duty and obligation they pertain of as public actors in the thing.
And you've given me the right word.
I will not think of that. Chair, thank you so very much. I have 5 key omissions. Chair, if I may allow, I have 5 key omissions, but I will pass them to the reader to choose from. I think that this is a very interesting Socratic extension. You came with the pregnancies, and I was a midwife. You have your baby, and it's a very bouncing one. But there is something missing here. I will urge that there's two big omissions. The arrivals of the Mill Hill missionaries in Kampala, sure. September 1895. It's a very consequential moment which you gloss over. It's launched intra-Catholic competition on the one hand, and it discounted intra-Christian political framings of Catholic Wafaransa and Protestant Bangerezas. Mill Hills, coming from the suburbs of London, called by Cardinal Lavigeries to his Cardinal Vaughan to come and decalibrate that moment. British, seeing other British being Catholics, but Uganda understanding that other English-speaking British could be Catholics was a very important moment. And that period is really glossed over. You have a theoretical framework which is by and large persuasive. But if you could really add Jacques Derrida, particularly as rendered by Andrea Casatella's Beyond the Secular, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and of course our very own Emmanuel Katongole, not the chemist, the political theologian. Katongole, in your treatment of the secular and the post-secular theoretical discussions, that will be another interesting addition. Now, the section on Catholic hierarchy on page 29 and 30, as well as your study area section from page 54 to 55, they are very much in dire need of corrigenda. You have serious corrigenda to make there. Ecclesiastical provinces and archdioceses cannot be collapsed. Those are two different things. Metropolitan bishops and diocesan ordinaries are collapsed. Kampala versus Rubaga is collapsed. The creation of a cardinal versus Kampala Metropolitan See is collapsed. The archives at Rubaga being a repository of Catholic documents, it is true, but not of all of Uganda. Finally, you have some particular instances of laxity in the writing style. Unexpectedly, for some reason, you have poor use of uppercase, punctuation, and improper preposition. It could have been good if this was not for doctoral thesis. But this is not that expected of Anatoli. Did you proofread your work?
This work I did proofread it,
yeah.
And I also did some editing. I had some editing services funded by the Gada Henkel program, and
gets back the invoice them back, and then get the mandatory for the proofread.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Dr. Tshimba, thank you so much. I felt the ground was leveled. Thank you so much. There was fire. There was academic fire here, and I'm happy that Anatoli, you were able to stand that fire. You are lucky that you are standing. For us who are stayed, it was really fire. And then, at one time I got confused whether the critical reader was the one defending the work or it was Lwassa. So, but that shows that the critical reader was very interested actually. You did it very well. And I was getting some messages there that you thank the dean for bringing the right person. There was no is and was here. This is how it should be. And thank you so much. I want to thank you once again for doing it well. I understand why we are stealing you from somewhere. You belong here, actually. You should be in Makere. Now we are going to have the panel members. We are going to start with, I would like to start with Dr. Christine Mbabazi-Mpiango. The reason being that she's one of the people whom you quoted. And Dr. Musano also has a question for you. I will read it for you during the audience time. So I just want to start with Dr. Mpiango to just engage the candidate since also engaged with your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chair. Anatoli, thank you so much for giving us a great morning. No wonder it's shining out there. First of all, I also really think that, I don't know why you're in history. So, Dean, we might need some crossing over of Lwassampijja to the Department of Religion and Peace Studies. I think today I'm one of those also very excited because it's been very, very gratifying to follow Anatoli as he went about his work. We shared some documents, we talked, we asked us some questions, even just in the corridor, meeting him very, sharp and running. So today you demonstrate that you are not just being busy around, but really engaging with so much. Your work evokes a lot of reflection because, first of all, the church and state relations is one of the topics I teach in one of the courses in African church history. So I'm excited because next semester I will be thinking about some of the things that you have brought out. I also think that when you have submitted and maybe graduated, you can give us one copy so that I can add it on the reading list for my students. So I'd like to say that on page 21, you do say that as the study traced continuities and contradictions in church and state relations, I was very happy to know that there are things that are continuing. I wanted you to say a little bit about continuing from what, and the contradictions. I'm happy with them because I could clearly see, but I was also wondering if there were any discontinuities that the study stumbled upon around about the same issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. When it comes to continuities, I looked at the fact that the continuity is basically around relying on the church for legitimacy, and it has always been like the state always relies on the church for legitimacy, and that has been like continuous. Right from the colonial era, we had the British relying on the Anglican church for legitimacy, and that is how they were engaging. That's how they brought about that Protestant dominance. And later on in the post-colonial era, successive governments have always relied on the church for this kind of legitimacy, and that has been one of the continuing things. About the discontinuities, you cannot talk about discontinuities when it comes to religion and politics in Africa and in Uganda particularly. And this kind of illuminates Mbiti's thesis of Africans being notoriously religious. It is very hard to kind of separate these two, and the discontinuities. For those I've not seen any from my findings.
Okay, I was wondering how different would your study be if it had not been the Catholic Church-state relations? What if you had added Roman Catholic Church-state relations? Because I've been thinking about the way Roman keeps kind of systematically missing out. Could you just make a comment on that? Because when I think about Catholic, I think it has a little more, with the universal aspect of the church, the ecclesia. So could you highlight why you kind of very intentionally leave out the Roman?
I didn't intend to leave it out. And surprisingly, whenever I'm filling out anything which requires me to state my religious affiliations, I will outrightly not write Catholic, I would write Roman Catholic. But for this study, I don't know why, I have no reason to that, but I just left it bracketed. But for purposes of specificity, I should be able to include that.
All right. I remember that, and I have seen that you have widely, or at least in different spaces, utilized our book, which you celebrated during your defense, and we're happy. And I had sent the link to Dr. Musana, so you know that he retired, but from wherever he was, I think in the garden, he took a break to actually join the defense. But I know that you look at the cooperation of the church, and then you go for conflict, cooperation, conflict. What about co-option? Because that's also in what you chose. What would you like to make a comment on church being co-opted in political agendas? And in any case, the whole issue, of course, I'm coming to the bit of the clientelism, but would you like to make a comment on that? Did it help you in some way?
Yeah, that actually helped me, and I largely used it as a theme actually in itself, in its own sense, especially when I was looking at the Idi Amin chapter and the Idi Amin's time. You could see that whereas he was a Muslim and he had this idea of making Uganda like a Muslim state, and he saw that this was a little bit not feasible, whereas he would lie that whenever he went out to the Arab world, he would project this image that Uganda is like a Muslim state, and Uganda was also admitted to the Muslim nations. But at home it was quite different because of the presence and the prominence of Christianity in Uganda. And as such, he often tried to co-opt the church. And in his campaigns, like the Idi Amin Charity Fund, he would always engage and bring on the church on board, just so that to show that Catholicism was safe under him, even if he was a Muslim president. So co-optation was a theme which was a little bit recurring. And
okay, so your earlier engagement with the opponent, it brings the whole gist of the discussion on, to us on the Catholic space, on the discussion about, the Catholic Church and the state, and the engagement was really good. But I saw that you admired and rightly utilized Musana's engagement with Pentecostalism in Uganda. So would you highlight the place of Pentecostalism in this discussion? And I see that you have cited Musana with his Pentecostalism.
Thank you so much. Well, regarding that, the only comment I can give about that, and which Musana also outrightly pulls out, is the fact that predominantly we've been having like two denominations, that is Anglican and Catholics, struggling for visibility, struggling for power, struggling for political participation, struggling for office. But Musana's work brings out something to show that, look, away from all these churches, something is coming up, and the Pentecostals are taking the forefront of this cake which they are struggling for in the visibility, and he gives out several examples, and his work is quite empirically rich because there are vivid examples, because we have the first family right now, which is almost Pentecostal. I would say that, given the daughter who is a pastor, given the first lady who is also Pentecostal leaning, and you will see that several political appointments, even Musana puts it out, several political appointments are now being geared or given to church members in the Pentecostal circles. For that, you can look at the previous KCCA person who got problems and was, I don't know, I'm forgetting the name.
Do you mean Kisaka?
Yes, Kisaka, having been a member of the church of. So several appointments are now being influenced. There is some kind of balance of power which is changing in these religions in regards to the politics of the country.
So I don't know whether you were able to strengthen that discussion in light of the church, the changing church and state.
I didn't highlight it out, but I should be able to highlight
Yes,
it.
because
Thank you
it
so much.
proposes a strength, or at least a bit of, wait a minute, it's no longer just Catholic, the Roman Catholic Church, in my view, and the Protestant Church, but also the strong and advancing influence of the Pentecostal movement. And then, of course, drawing close to an end, I would like to ask another thing that I've been contemplating. So the church and her prophetic voice, which we all expect that in the state, in the church-state relations, the prophetic voice should remain. If there is anything about church, and you will realize that is what Pope John was trying to mean when he talks about the role of the church, the place of the church, you know, for social justice, for peace, for, you know, for all the good things that he articulates. So, if you look at what the church is meant to be and the clientelism in Uganda, something seems to go wrong. What is your take on, for example, you defending a thesis of this nature today, when, as far as I'm concerned right now, all churches are occupied with clientelism? What do you have to say about the prophetic voice of the church vis-a-vis the political clientelism?
All right. Thank you so much for that. And that is quite key. And that points to my point of departure in this thesis. And for my, on that, I would observe and note that clientelism is real eminent. It is taking place and it is happening. However, I speak against it, and I argue somewhere in my thesis that the state should look at the church as a moral compass, as for guidance in regarding morality and as a nation, rather than looking at it largely as a client in that way, because this kind of blurs the church's prophetic voices. Because after this reciprocal exchange, it's a little bit hard to speak out. However, the church also has a duty,
Yes.
to do its work. Regardless of all this, it has been seen on several occasions where the Catholic Church, and why I speak about the Catholic Church is the fact that regardless of the donations, regardless of the gifts from the state, it has kept a firm ground. It has spoken to power. It has defended the morality of this nation. And I give it credit for that.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. So finally, on in your bibliography, I noticed that at some point the names are coming with the first name instead of the last name, and other points it's the other. So for example, if you look at Louise Pirouette, you will find that it's Louise coming, and then later I can see on page 225 I see Pirouette coming first, and the same with Musana. Sometimes it's Pade.
Sure.
So that inconsistency needs to be cleaned up. Thank you, Lwassa, and I'm very proud of your great work.
Thank you so much, Doc.
Congratulations this far.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mpyangu, for engaging the candidate. We have someone, that Dr. Spire Sentongo is online, but he cannot talk. I'm going to ask, he has sent me the questions. Kindly respond to them carefully. But I would like you to first to at least to listen to his appreciation of you. He says the reading of the candidate's thesis was uniquely and refreshing and stimulating. It is carefully and articulately written. I encourage the candidate to consider taking it beyond being a requirement for PhD. He wants you to publish it into a form of a book. So, He has sent us two questions. The question number one, if you can maybe write, or I don't know, but how did you manage being a Catholic in this study? Do you think it allowed you to take a disinterested scholarly stance? How did you manage being a Catholic in this study? Did you think it allowed you to take a disinterested, in other words, to have no conflict of interest, scholarly position? If so, how? That is question number one. Question number two, what do you make of your selection of the event in analysis? What do you make of your selection of event analysis, to analyze, sorry? So he is asking, don't you, in some cases, only deliberately touch the leg of the elephant and quickly announce that the elephant is a shape like a tree stem? Do you get that question? Yes. Those are the questions he's asking you to engage with. Thank you.
Wow, those are serious questions. And how did I manage being a Catholic in this study? And and he asked whether it allowed me to take a disinterested scholarly position. No, it didn't tell it. I would say that it didn't. I remained Catholic even in the study, and I believe I did a very good religious job in the thesis. I laid out my positionality, which was very clear, so that all readers who may read this work may know from which position I was coming from. The writer is a Catholic, but my positionality as a Catholic had several advantages, because it granted me access. That is the first thing. It granted me access. I could approach authorities, and clergymen would be confident to interact with me, which would have been a different case for any non-Catholic scholar, I guess so. And it also helped me to understand the internal beliefs and the institutions of the church in a way that a non-Catholic scholar would not have understood or comprehended. And what do you make of, the second question was, what do you make of your selection on the events of analysis? Now, and this brings me back to the devil's advocate when he said this is qualitative research and you cannot determine bias. This is not scholarly enough, but the events of analysis were chosen just by interest. By interest. What captivated me is what I wrote about. Maybe if anyone engages me with any other event which may captivate them and captivates me as well, I would be propelled to write about that. But for now, for the events of analysis, I largely chose events which were, one, rich in empirical data. I could have material about them. There are several other events which I wanted, but for lack of empirical data, I couldn't delve into them. And that informed my choice of some of these events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You want?
I want to stay alert.
That's good. What about the audience? Would you like to stretch a bit? But most probably like 1 minute, 2 minutes.
Not to give him too much confidence.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
He has passed. Please, can we continue? Thank you so much. The one who is coming next is Dr. John Bosco Kamoga. Please come and engage the candidate.
Thank you very much, Chair. Anatoli, I want to congratulate you on delivering this thought-provoking piece of work. I should also add my voice to the fact that, yeah, it was generally well written. It was an easy read. I think it has opened an important conversation on top of all the other accolades that have been accorded to it in this conversation. Since you have already had a rigorous talk with the opponent and Dr. Mpyangu, I'm going to go easy on you. Just a few questions. Could you speak to us? At what point does a religious actor act as a person, and when does he act in the name of the religious institution that they represent? Because this seems to be taken for granted that of actions of actors who happen to be religious leaders, at least in your thesis, when I was reading it, they seem to be always official actions. Could you speak to us about that?
Wow. That's a serious one. At what point does a religious actor speak as a person and an institution? The perfect answer would be, in my opinion, it is a little bit hard once you assume positions of leadership to distance yourself at any one moment. There is a way you lose your persona in a way, and you are representing this office at all times. That's what I would say. And in terms of this, for me, that's a tough one, I should say.
I want
but
to
the point is there. It is very hard to
Mm.
distance.
I want to invite you to reflect about this, especially because as an academic
Yes.
work, because then we would be imagining a situation where, for instance, Bishop Semogere is supporting Arsenal, and then the Catholic Church is supporting Arsenal. Maybe, I mean, do you understand so you need maybe to at least define how do you qualify a pronunciation or something to be an official position or an official act of the church, and I would like you to do. And I was also not very well sold on the reasoning you gave for concentrating on Kampala Diocese, but you're talking about political clientelism in Uganda, the Catholic Church and state relations. Because you are not engaged in a case study design. So it's difficult to understand that, you know, you could not even find at least a diocese in the northern Uganda or somewhere else to at least represent what you are saying as a case of the Catholic Church and state in Uganda. So, I struggled to get that.
Thank you so much. I gave about 2 reasons or justifications as to why I concentrated on Kampala. But even with the independent reader, it was still you questioned that. But I still stand on the choice of Kampala as a representative case of the entire church. Reason being, besides housing, because it is like a symbolic head office of Ugandan Catholicism in Uganda, having Kampala Archdiocese where you have the cardinal somewhere, where you have the representative of the Pope still housed in Kampala, and Kampala is also being located within the perimeters of the national capital. It was easier for me to observe church and state relations from a front row view. And that aside, I know I may not convince you today, but most of the pastoral letters I deal with in this study are authored within the diocese. And that also provides another justification as to why I concentrate on this as a representative case.
I think you know that it's permissible to deal with more than one design in the study, because I think a case study design added to the design you chose could justify this better than simply saying because the seat is here, because these are 19 dioceses we are talking about, and they have their own histories and their own realities. So I think that is something you need to take a little bit more seriously than, yeah.
I will surely take it upon.
And speaking of pastoral letters, there was a conspicuous silence from you about the silence of the church in the last almost 15, 20 years. We have not seen any pastoral letter that you would say has come out from the Catholic Church on matters of national importance. Was it also strategic silence? And speaking to the issue of strategic silence, you left me wondering, Jesus Christ was never known for a convenient actor. He was actually a troublemaker at all times. He was outspoken. And is it your position that the church has to cater for issues of self-preservation, or it has to be what it is, a prophetic presence? And coupled to that is how I lacked a more critical engagement with this issue. You went hard on the government doing this and this and this. Is the church, and I use the church in a very, very careful way because you already adulterated the use of the word, but is the church taken as you took it? Is the church an innocent victim in this? Is it an innocent victim? With almost you almost justified the issue of acceptance of gifts and this and that and the other conveniently, but what does it speak about a church which is not the church of Oscar Romero, which came out and stood up? A church of personalities that we have known. And do you think that the people on the ground who are not considered the church, do they like the stance of their church?
Oh. I'm into a hot seat now. But I'll still speak to some of these. You point about a conspicuous silence regarding the pastoral letters, and in my final version, I've written somewhere in the conclusion chapter about this silence, noting that the church has been quiet, and I also point out some of the areas where I felt that warranted strong pastoral voice or a strong pastoral letter. For instance, the the massacre of people in Wakiso, women in Wakiso, before the 2016 elections that was going on. We didn't see, apart from different homilies here and there, we didn't see a strong pastoral letter on that. And also the electoral violence and imprisonment of political prisoners, and a lot of things which go amiss and the church doesn't comment, doesn't come out to write strong pastoral letters. And whenever I was writing this section actually about this silence, it always came to my mind, what would Kiwanuka have done if at all he came back today? It was always rescinding in my mind about that silence. So I've taken note of that. In my earlier versions, I hadn't taken note of that, but after reflections and after several comments from different independent readers, I took charge of that.
And very finally, this is just a comment for you to reflect on. Part of the purpose of the existence of historians, theologians, and other people in the church is to help their church or their faith community to steady their feet. While I agree with the independent reader that bias may not be avoided, but also you need to be honest and critical in the way you speak to some of the issues so that the church can use its own members to correct it. So it is easier to say these are bad actors from outside who are criticizing us. But if you can speak to issues that are happening, and I think there are serious issues that are happening that need to be called out in terms of the state-church relations, and especially which come at the cost of the very duty the church is supposed to stand for. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. JB, for engaging the candidate. Now we are going to ask Dr. Deo Katono. They want to see you, the cameras. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Katono.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the Dean for considering me once again to come and interact with the brains. My name is Katono Deo. I'm Staff Emeritus at the Department of History, Archaeology, and Heritage. Lwassa, thank you very much for reaching this point. I was very happy about the reading. It was a very interesting reading. I also had issues about objectivity, like the independent reader said, but you have answered them very well. I just have three things to interact with you about. The first one, I noticed that in your study, you have proposed a terminology, political Catholicism, which is on page 84. I would like you to substantiate for me and for Professor Mbabazi, what is this political Catholicism? Is there economic Catholicism? Kindly help me to unpack.
Thank you so much. Now, the lens of political Catholicism is like a philosophy which treats politics from a Catholic perspective, grounded in principles of social justice, truth. Yes, that's what I can say about that.
This is to suggest that Catholicism stands for the truth and stands for justice, as different from Anglicanism or different from fundamentalism in Islam?
Not to say that as different, but it is a call not to turn away or not to get shy from the truth and justice at whatever cost it may have.
Oh, thank you. My next engagement is a small one. You mentioned from the constructivist approach, the leadership styles of Archbishop Chwanaka and Cardinal Subga. And you described their reactions to the events of the time. One of them, he said he was a reformist, he took a reformist stance. Another one he said was prophetic resistance and moral defiance. At some point you also called it confrontational. I see a confusion. Prophetic resistance and moral defiance, and then reformist stance. Where is the confrontation? Where is the moral defiance? Kindly comment on that.
Thank you so much. When you look at that area, when I use those heavy terms, I'm just realizing that they are really heavy words, because they all have, they all induce different meanings, if not well catered for or well explained. But when I say that, when I point to the reformist stance, I'm pointing to the fact that he was against the Protestant dominance or hegemony which had already taken shape in Uganda's politics. And he is trying to advise and kind of, he's trying to reform what is at stake and encouraging the Catholics. And if I may remember a quote very well, he was explaining why people at that moment were against Catholics participating in politics. And he says, those against you or those against this kind of participation are doing so because they want to continue with the kind of Protestant monopoly. So he's trying to reform the political landscape to be inclusive. Everyone has a right, even Catholics have a moral obligation to participate in the civic duties, yet they were being curtailed at that moment to stop. And he's confrontational in the sense that he is a Muganda himself, but he's going against what the state is saying, what Buganda is saying, the voice of Buganda, and he's confronting it using his position as a church. That's what I can say about it.
Thank you. My final, it's not a question, it's, when I was reading this book, I noticed that in Buganda, in the history of Buganda, the events of 1966 and 1967 were very important. I did not see the reaction of Bishop Chwanaka. Did he react anything? Did he just react by keeping quiet? I thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. In history, you work with your sources, and for now, my sources, the sources I have so far, have not granted me the opportunity to know what Chwanaka was up to at that moment. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Katono. Finally, we are going to have Dr. Lwassampijja. And maybe you are fortunate or unfortunate that most of these people on the panel, they seem to have conflict of interest, and they are very critical, but they are cool, don't worry.
Thank you very much, Chair. And congratulations, Anatoli. Chair, yes, I have another conflict of interest, actually, which is not that one. Because I have a brother who is called Lwassampijja. So the other one is my elder brother, but this is my younger brother. So I'm going to be very professional at the same time. And I would like to congratulate my young brother for giving us the lesson of this year, I think, because you are exploring into an area that possibly could very easily catch headlines around the season where we are now, I think. And that would be wonderful for us, I think, as an academic community. Also, personally, reading your work, and I must confess that I'm still reading it, has given me very good tutoring about the so much contribution of religion. Now, I don't want to talk about the church, but religion in the shaping of the social landscape in this country. And I think it's a reading worth that many people need to explore. Now, having said that, and coming at the end, Madam Chair, by the way, the other thing I need to tell you, my name is Lwassampijja. So I'm coming to crown this interaction with my young brother by virtue of my name. Now, Anatoli, I wanted to begin with the simpler things. I have seen and heard in your presentation a lot of these words. The word like church, word like visibility. I read and heard ambivalence, paradox, privilege. I don't know which other word I haven't heard. The pregnant. Yeah, these are words that are all over the place. And then I tried to check in this work. I didn't find a section that defines these words. I don't know whether it was an oversight on my part or it doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, I strongly recommend that there will be one, so that we can define these words and be talking about the same things. And precisely on that note, I wanted to pick up on one of the key words in your title, and I think also in your work. But maybe I should begin this by a different question. Would I be wrong, Anatoli, if I came to a conclusion to say that initially the first part of your title was not part of your work? That initially this work was reading the Catholic Church and state relations since 1960. Initially, and maybe you might want to share with us at what point you chose to add the first part of the title.
No, from the conceptualization of the project, the title has never changed.
Okay then. So this clientelism, what is it exactly? And where in your work is it found exactly?
Thank you so much. For starters, I acknowledge the fact that there is an omission that I don't give a section to conceptualize some of these terms. But for this study, I conceptualize or understand clientelism as a system of reciprocal exchange, where the political section, where the government, where political favors, all material is traded for loyalty, and for loyalty, silence or support, in a way. We're having clientelism happening across all these regimes. And I think I just didn't put it out right, but I think I need to put it out, because starting from Obote 1, when Obote hands over, directly himself goes and delivers a vehicle to the Archbishop. The Archbishop first refused this kind of vehicle because he thought this was like a trading off for something. And I think I had to highlight some of this tension. This is where the clientelism a little bit comes in. And with such, across all the decades, I've seen that with such gifts and donations, the state expects the church to be silent on several issues. And this reminds me of, I don't want to digress, I won't go into that. But this is something just recent during some exhibition which was being organized at Uganda Matters University about the Uganda Matters. And as they were arranging and soliciting funds, even from the state, one particular government authority outrightly said, "But we give you our money and you go on your pulpits the following day, you are around us." So they expect, they're giving this money, well knowing that there should be some kind of reciprocity. And I want to think that for cases where I keep this kind of clientelism silent, I should be able to highlight it out so that it can be seen.
Okay, thank you. That makes it a bit clearer. I think that as an academic, this is a concept you need to engage very deeply, in my opinion. I like that here you're using another complementary term, which you are calling reciprocity. And for me, reciprocity would be, as we're in this room, or between me and you here, we start negotiating that I'm giving you this so that I can get this. And that's what exactly I was understanding here. If there is a fundraising that is taking place, like the one that has been going on about the refurbishment of the cathedral, and the president of Uganda comes with a brown envelope and deposits it there and then disappears, how would you define that?
With open eyes, I would regard it as a donation of any faithful, or I would also regard it as the government's way of supporting some of these institutions. However, not only the timing, like it or not, from my discoveries, there is always expectation out of this, in a way.
And I totally agree. That's why I think that as an academic, you are the one now to unpack this. In fact, to debunk it. And I'm glad that now, as part of your defense of your work, you have consistently stated that the church has tried to maintain its stance on certain things. Maybe not. Maybe at some point the church has been compromised. Maybe. Yeah. So I wanted to hear that voice and your engagement of that term. If really what you intend to communicate is what you mean. Because my second question was exactly that. Because who is the beneficiary at the end? Who is the main beneficiary? If you're talking about reciprocity. So what does the state get out of attempting to buy the church?
The state will get support. They know that when you look at some of the theories which I used, Gramsci and Foucault, you will see that it expects to get some kind of influence, or using the church to influence the masses towards this. And you've seen this in some churches lately. Away from the Catholic Church, you've seen like that some Pentecostal churches, just for lack of, I'm not here for Pentecostals, I'm very sorry, but it is just obvious. YouTube videos are all over with people taking the pulpit to speak against people in the opposition, political actors in the opposition, and in support of the government. And I want to think this is the kind of reciprocity the state wants, but it has not gotten from several areas in the Catholic Church.
All right. I think it's something you need to reflect deeper on. Is it to gag the church? Is it? I don't know really, because this is something you need to give real attention. You might be communicating what it is not. And also I became curious. For example, among your participants in this study, who is the big voice that is representing, for example, the state? And when you ask them what they say, why do they do that kind of thing? Okay? And here come in mind is a personality like, for example, Prime Minister Nabanja, because many times she's the one you're going to find, or the Vice President, for example, in these church-related affairs. Are these some of the people you interviewed?
Unfortunately, I didn't. But I interpreted their actions. I interpreted their rhetoric around this, and because several cases came out, and you've talked about the Prime Minister, and in some of these, the person I was talking about critiquing the church's criticism against the government, it was the very person, because he had donated lots and lots of money, whereas it was a little bit hard to get access to them. I interpreted, or I deduced from their public speeches, and this is what I came up with.
Okay, my other question, and quickly, I see my chair is beginning to signal me that I have to leave this place. Yeah, just quickly. Not yet, okay. Okay, I want to ask a very general question for you to think about. In this work, what is the difference between religion and the church on the one hand, and the church and the Catholic Church on the other hand? What is the difference between religion and the church on the one hand, and the church and the Catholic Church on the other hand? I don't know whether you want to provide an answer today, or if you want, you might.
That is quite tough, but I will attempt.
Quickly. Just quickly, yeah.
Yes. And for this study, I look at religion not simply as faith or doctrine, rather as a social and political language. And that's how I conceptualize it. Beyond the faith and beyond the doctrine, I'm looking at it as a social and political language through which power, morality, and belonging are expressed in a way. And the church generically would be like an institution. But for the purpose of this study, I look at the church as an institutional and a symbolic actor. Institutional in the sense that it has networks of schools, hospitals, and all of that, all sorts of institutions. And symbolic in the sense that it represents the moral conscience of society. And that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking that, because reading your work, I see a lot of overlap. You have overlaps between religion, church, Catholic Church. And for you, it seems to be very obvious that when you say church, you are talking about Catholic Church.
I put a disclaimer in, I noted somewhere
On
in
page
my
6.
introduction that in this study, just for purposes of, for the readers, whenever I'll be using church, I'm largely focusing on the Catholic Church. And whenever I was focusing on the Anglican Church, I had to stipulate Anglican. But largely when I was using church, I was...
This is what I have on page 6 for clarity. Now, in this study, the term church is used interchangeably in reference to the Catholic Church institution, i.e. the Catholic hierarchy and the social institution for ordinary Catholics. And that's why, for example, Dr. Kamoga was asking you if the Pope chose to go to a cinema somewhere, who would be in that cinema? Is it the church?
It's the Pope.
It will be the Pope?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like you to disaggregate those persons, because all of them are persons, or perhaps institutions, if you like.
Sure.
So that you are clear when you are talking about which one. Okay? Then my second last question, and you might dismiss this one to be obvious, but I want you to think about it seriously. Is there any relationship between the Catholic Church in Uganda and the state? Is there any relationship? Is there any MOU you can think about that the church has ever entered in with the state? Is there any kind of real framework of relationship? Because otherwise then your discussion can become very fluid. And that's why I started with the first question, that perhaps you are really talking about the relationship in the generic terms. Okay, that there has been an amendment on the Constitution to remove the age limit, and then the head of the Catholic Church has stood up to give a commentary, just the same way the head of the Muslim faith also stood and said something, and the head of the Orthodox also said something. So how do you define this relationship in technical terms, if there is any? And very finally, Chair, in your opinion, Anatoli, is religion the problem in Uganda, politically speaking? Is religion a problem in Uganda's political landscape? Or what is the real problem? Okay? Because do you think that if people did not associate in terms of religious groupings or in religious ideologies, probably you would be having less political, whatever you want to call it, contestation in this country? You know, so what is the real role of religion in the politics of this country? You see? And you might want to attempt to answer that. And that will be my final one. I thank you very much, Chair, and the candidates, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bernard. This gives me a lot of insights and ideas on how to rethink and think more deeply about my work. Though some of the insights you raise cannot be attempted right now, because that will be suicidal. They require careful thinking and regurgitation, and I don't know. But thank you so much for reading my work closely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Werekera. Now we are going to have, questions from the public, but I want to just appreciate you the way you have been answering questions, being political, but at the same time keeping your religion at heart. I have one question. Farouk, do you have more questions from the public? We had a question from Dr. Pade Musana. He's on the line. Dr. Pade Musana is one of the people actually quoted, so I think it's good also when we read his question first. So he asked, and I want you to get it right. Did I hear right that the candidate had access some archival from Rome, which he could not put out the public since it could taint the Catholic Church. The church actually said the church. Did he hear well? You got the question?
Yes, I got it.
And then we are going to have another question from Professor DiPio. Kindly ask your question. Can we have another microphone, Farouk? Or we have?
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the opportunity. And I want to thank Anatoli very, very much for this excellent research. My comments will come just, to strengthen this. One of the things you said here repeatedly in different ways is that the responsibility of the clergy and indeed of the Catholic Church, the Catholic faithful, in advocating for certain values, especially those of social justice, the common good, and those things that concern the public. And you quoted also the Archbishop Kiwanuka, and also when Pope came and the continued intervention of others. But you did these excellent references to people without clearly explaining for me why do these Catholics do what they do. For me, one of the things that will pin you right there and liberate you from even struggling to explain is making reference to the social teachings of the church. These principles of why the Catholic clergy and indeed the faithful should do the kind of things some of these people get imprisoned for and even killed for is really part of their DNA of what it means to be a Catholic in the public sphere. So that I think this is one of the things that is not well understood, and that is why the state gets at, the Catholics as interfering and so on. So if you theoretically, among the several other theoretical frames, if you include that as one of the frames that inform why these people do what they do, and indeed the explanation that even if you try to give them money, they will still come to do what they will not do, because for me, I was so impressed. I say, wow, so they understand the social teachings in that sense. So put that there as one of your theoretical frames. And then secondly, the other thing about what you said about Idi Amin performing this apparent kindness to religious leaders, and in comparison to also President Museveni is trying to straitjacket them in their lane and politics in their lane. That I found also very interesting, because I was just asking whether really was Idi Amin simply performing here, or is this really a genuine belief in what religion, the position of religion now, not necessarily Catholics, is, and therefore deep respect for it. I'm saying this because a week ago I had an interview with a very old Komboni missionary, and he told me Idi Amin respected them so much. They didn't have any problem directly with India, even if some of them were persecuted and sent away. And the explanation he gave me was that the thing you made hint to, the conflict, underlying conflict between Protestantism and Catholicism there. And it is them that will report them negatively to Idi Amin, and whatever was done to them was later on done. So these two performances, who was really performing? Was Idi Amin performing or being truly genuine? Because he appeared, not besides the benches he gave to all the clergy leaders, they felt he really valued their role until it got to those competitions that quite political. But otherwise, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you, Chair, for giving me the chance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Professor DePio, for those critical questions. Thank you so much, Professor. That's a very good, those are good comments. But what I feel as someone who is a Roman Catholic, actually, I don't have conflict of interest there. But what I find the relationship between Roman Catholic and politicians is what you call love-hate relation. Love-hate relationship. So it's very hard to really to separate the church from politics. That one, I don't think that we can do that. Yeah, and I think whatever we get from by the political leaders, we should take it with open hands, because that's our money. Those are our taxes. So there is another question, but before that there was someone who was appreciating you, congratulating you. I think you read it. And now we are going to, there is another question, maybe you can read it to yourself. Can the candidate elaborate on his operation definition of clientelism using citation based on the evidence as opposed to local observations, as per this wonderful written work? I think that question was already asked by Dr. Lwassampijja, isn't it? So I think maybe that question was answered.
And,
okay.
Just allow me to...
Question, does this state in Uganda sponsor the church? That's a very hard question. Oh, I think the person, thank you so much, Hamid. That's a very good question, but most probably you know the answer. Okay, feel free to answer these questions. Then.
Like earlier said during the interaction with Professor Lwassampijja on the conceptualization of the term of several concepts that I use, I can also see another friend of mine here, Dr. J.B. Mpaji, raising the same and advising me to use citation-based evidence as opposed to my own observation of this, and I'll take it up because I have to have a structure of yes. And does the state in Uganda sponsor the church? I'll just leave it at that.
There are other questions?
Sure.
Professor DePio, did you answer?
No, there were comments and they were just strengthening my work.
Okay.
Yes. Definitely, I have to because
that will help you a lot.
When you were raising that, it showed that it could have answered probably most of the questions which have been raised in this room.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the brilliance you demonstrate in handling most of the tough issues. My question is one, I am wondering whether you believe from your own research about issues of existential threats. Does the church believe that her existence is always threatened by the state? Or does the state believe that her existence is threatened by the church? Because either of the two, if the state believes that the church in one way or the other threatens her existence because the goal of the state is to acquire power, retain power by all means, whether good or bad. So if the institution of the church is interpreted to be a threat to our existence, the state will act in a way that you have discovered in order to ensure her existence is there. But also, when you look at Darkness at Noon, that novel, sometimes when the existence, this time of the Roman Catholic Church, which you avoided the word Roman, is threatened, the church may be released from bonds of morality and all means are justified or sanctified. What is your comment with your study? How do you reconcile these two forces? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a very wonderful question, and it also handled well, it could also highlight and strengthen my problem statement in a way. Because in my background somewhere, I write about the concern of the state being threatened of the church, specifically the Catholic Church. And here I quote somewhere a sergeant in the colonial era warning the British officials about the rise of Catholicism in Uganda, warning them that wherever the Romans are, it has always been a little bit problematic for them as colonial. And he was quoting noting of Ireland and how Catholicism had already taken root and how it disrupted the state powers that be or that were in. And indeed, this existential threat exists. And that is why at one moment still in the Obote era, we see a lot of concern about restricting entry of missionaries even when the church didn't have enough manpower. So the threat is there, the threat is imminent, and both institutions struggle to control influence. And that is why I bring about the concept of visibility in the public life. Whoever controls the public life can determine the direction of the country. And that is why the negotiation between these two entities takes shape. So thank you so much for that. I don't know whether it's a question or a comment, but it is something which really highlights my arguments which I have in this book. Thank you so much.
Anatoli, still you didn't answer Dr. Musana's question, and he's still insisting that you have to answer his question. Remember his question was...
Yes, I remember the question. I remember the question. I don't know how I missed it. Yes, I want to think he had very well. And my reason for leaving out certain archival material was, one, things that could harm the persons who are still living in a way. So you kind of leave that. I don't know how. I think it was a slip on the job that I was able to access that file in a way. This is why I left out that particular piece of work.
Yeah, there is also Henry. I think it's like a comment. It's a comment, but I think which is very important. If you can read it, please. I think Dr. Masiga wanted to ask some question. Oh, do we have other questions from the audience? Online, do we have any question? Okay. It means the public, actually, the audience is agreeing with whatever you are defending because they don't have many questions. Can we go back and we ask you just kindly stay with us? We are just going to go back to the Dean's office and the deliberate will come within 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
have your attention, please, please, please? Anatoli, you are very far, I don't know. How is your heartbeat? Huh? Because I saw when the last question he said, sigh of relief. Welcome back to the last session. The panel has deliberated and has found Anatoli Lwassampijja worthy of being considered for award of doctorate in, is it history and religion? Before I announce that, we need to recognize our beloved principal. And this is deliberate because, and let's be proud of our principal, because one of the things actually you need to know that we have most of our students from, in our department, from education. And every time they are asking us, how come that we don't have this sort of technology like in education? I said, you come and, what? You come and befriend our principal. Thank you so much, principal, for really putting us there, out there, the technology, but also I was actually, I'm becoming like an advocate of Anatoli. I think Anatoli should join our department of regional peace studies. And on a serious note, I mean it. So I think from here you have to go to the principal and play your cards very well, right? Like how you normally. This time you shouldn't rush. I always meet you in the corridors rushing every time. Rushing, but he gives you a smile. So this time when you are going there, don't rush. Okay? But congratulations, Anatoli. We are happy for you. And the panel found actually you did not only pass, but you passed with what you call summa cum laude. Summa means first class. So first class with acclamation, with like how we are clapping. Thank you so much, members, for being here for Anatoli. Thank you everyone for your time. Opponent, you did a very, very good job. The panelists, you did also wonderful. Thank you so much, Florence. Thank you so much, Professor Farouk. Thank you so much, of course, supervisors. Oh my God. Dr. Edgar, thank you so much. One time Edgar surprised me. He knows the history of Uganda more than I do. Yeah, but there is one thing to be a historian, but also to be passionate about that. Exactly. He was telling me that, do you know that we have the archive down there in the main building? I said, no. Yeah, you go there and see everything is there. I said, what? So thank you so much, not only being part of my career, but being passionate about the history of Uganda. Thank you so much, our beloved Dean. There is one time I told her she makes me guilty sometimes. Whenever I want to say no, sometimes I become guilty. Thank you so much. I think, Principal, you need to say something, Banang. Yes, please say something. our dean is doing very well, sincerely speaking. Yes, from there, please. Yeah. Yeah. And we appreciate you every time you make an effort to come to the defenses. Thank you.
You know, colleagues, this is where it becomes dangerous when your head of department is the chair of a session. And most of the time she sees you as you're in a staff meeting. Thank you so much, Professor Veni. My dean, I must say I'm very proud of you. You have done us well. And I really want to add my voice to the chair to really thank the panelists, the opponent. At one point, I didn't want to be in his shoes, but thank you for carrying on that conversation. And indeed, colleagues, friends, those who have defended, where are we? Those who have finished their defenses, lovely. And those who are on the way, Esther, really, thank you so much. We appreciate. Can I see those who are on the way? Okay. Now you know that it is possible. I cannot wait. I've been telling the dean that every time I see an announcement, I clear my voice. So we are really praying for you. We can support you physically. And even when you don't see us physically, just know we have you in our hearts. Congratulations, Lwassampijja. May God go before you, and I can't wait to have you in our department. Because when the head says so, who am I? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Helen Nambari Nkawala. After hearing from a principal, now I have to tell you that we have passed you, but you have to do some minor corrections. And those corrections, we get them from Dr. Florence Birirwa. So she will give you corrections and address them. We have given you 3 months. That's the policy. But you can do these corrections within 1 week if you have to graduate. Congratulations once again. Let's ask Lwassa. Do you have your family here? You don't have, okay. So, please. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair, Dr. Veni Mbabazi. I'm very glad that this defense was chaired by you, because you really fill the room with a lot of energy, and you make the candidate comfortable in whatever. I think it's a gift. For acknowledgements, I wish to acknowledge and thank the Almighty God who has helped me and enabled me to stay focused on this journey, which has not been easy at all. It has been quite a journey full of hurdles. And I thank the entire doctoral committee. I was very privileged that on this doctoral committee, I had some of my former teachers who taught me at bachelor's. Dr. Katono saw me when I was a young man, even before I started voting officially, because I first voted when I got to campus here, and he was teaching me history. Dr. Christine Mpiangu, those lectures in the main hall where you took us through African traditional religion. And you've seen me grow throughout. Still on my doctoral committee, I also had Dr. Bernard Luwerekera, who always engaged me in different conversations about my work, about life, about clan issues in that case. And he was always passionate about my work. Each and every time you would, in case you're not in your best mental mood, intellectual mood, you would want to avoid him, because he would always engage you in an intellectual conversation. I thank the CHUS leadership, the principal, for enabling this and giving us this kind of atmosphere, the presentations, the funding, and also the Gada Henkel Stiftang funders. Thank you so much. Our coordinators, Dr. Edgar Nabutanyi and Dr. Levis Mugumya, and the coordinators here present, Esther Namitala. You don't only stop at funding us, you still follow up to see the output. I was one time touched by one of our coordinators, Duncan Muhanguzi, who found me walking to Maiza and stopped me and asked me, what's the problem? Why are you not submitting? What's not happening? Can I talk to your supervisor? Can I engage your supervisors? I told him, the problem is not mine. My supervisors are very fine. It's only me delaying myself. So I thank them very much. I owe a lot of gratitude to my supervisors. My supervisors have really done a lot of work. I don't want to overtalk about my supervisors because I'm a very emotional person. I cannot be a hard guy on this. Dr. Pamela Khanakwa, who found me right from my MA, held my hand. Dr. Khanakwa, I cannot thank you enough, but one thing I can promise, I cannot repay you. I cannot repay your generosity. One thing I can promise is that when I ever get in your footsteps, I will treat the students the way you've treated me and the way you've handled me. You knew my weaknesses and you found all possible ways of working around them. You knew I was a somewhat perfectionist and never did you put me on pressure. You always told me, Ras, share your work whenever you feel you are ready. You handled me well. You directed me. Right from masters, you shared all these materials. There is one particular instance which touches me. I always thought that, okay, I know enough history now. After my masters, after having been given several books to read, each and every time I would write a chapter and share it, go back and read this book. You have not mastered the art of writing history. That is a pocket guide of writing history. And I think I still have it in my drawer, which I've kept for years. I should return that copy today after this graduation. I hope the final copy of the thesis, I try to work around those corrections you always pointed out. My supervisors have been perfectionists as well. Dr. Khanakwa will mark your English, and I remember very well when I first shared my first draft, the first 4 chapters, I got comments which I never attempted. I just read through, got the comments, analyzed them, put them in, but it took me 8 months to respond to all those comments. And I never shared that draft, and she was patient with me because I knew that what she required of me. My principal supervisor, Dr. Edgar Taylor, who is still, because he's meticulous with his job, he has already gone back to teach. He has a class. This one has been quite key in this doctoral study. I remember a time, it was a weekend and we were applying for something with Dr. Taylor. I spent over 3 nights without sleeping, total sleeping. And in my heart, I had this conception, maybe Americans don't sleep. He would send the draft at 1, and that draft is followed by a phone call. Yes, Lwassa, read the draft and get back to me before you sleep. You respond, you clear, you think it is so perfect, you send it. Again, another phone call at 3. Yes, I've seen the draft, let me work on it. Don't sleep before I give you more edits. Those were 3 nights, 3 solid nights without sleep. That was serious training because it helped me when I went elsewhere. My cohort members, who have been quite amazing. We've been a family, we've been a team, we've been encouraging each other, and our coordinator, Nelson in Serekol. And those who graduated before us, we have Reverend Masiga here. Thank you for always cheering us on. Thank you for always encouraging us to take on this journey. People have been supported by a lot of friends. I have a network of friends. Some who I told certain lies not to come here for purposes best known to me. And most of these friends have been supportive. When I went out for fellowships, in Italy and in the US, these friends always visited my family, checked on my children. They did a lot of things for me. They supported me mentally, emotionally, and financially. Along this journey, I had an accountability partner, and these were two. I had Albert Mujandwa, who defended, right now is in Tanzania. I pray that he's safe wherever he is. And the best person, who I call my best academic friend, Dr. Fatuma Mirembe. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. I have a lot of friends in and out of academia. The friends out of academia always help me to unwind and get myself off the books, and whenever I didn't want to engage in any scholarly discussions, those were my go-to buddies. And in academia, I have a couple of friends, many friends who have helped me a lot with reading materials, I thank my family, which has been quite fundamental in this journey. And as a firstborn in Uganda, we all know you hold the mantle. And to my siblings who are online, I wish this step inspired you to also aspire for the best. Bring those degrees home. Olga, I saw you online. Bring that MBA home. Daisy, I saw you online. Bring that CPA home. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. People came here on time, and trust me, this is the only first exam I've ever attended. And I started the exam smiling, and I ended out crying in a way. But the mood which I found here was quite good. It was, I always come late in defenses, but I want to change that, because I think when you see familiar faces, you feel at home. I want us to join our hands and thank one particular person, that is Mr. Farouk Lule. When I came in this room, his work is just to work with the IT, ensure your slides are okay, and he goes. He was arranging the entire room, sitting arrangement. This should be this, this should be this. So, Mr. Farouk Lure, for being that meticulous. And on top of that, he makes you a little bit calm. He will crack jokes, he will crack your ribs. He got me away from all the stress. And I had a very good entry point to my presentation. My critical reader. The critical reader is someone who I've always revered in a way. I didn't know that he was reading this work. And he's someone who always asked for my work. How is the progress? But in my heart, knowing how critical he is, I was like, I won't go into this debate. I won't share this work. It is still an ugly draft. But as I don't know how destiny had it that you've been the critical reader. Thank you so much for reading my work closely. That was a close reading. The insights were quite helpful, and you've also helped me understand my work more. So thank you so much. Everyone, thank you so much.
So I think the supervisors, please.